Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Empire's Shadow. Roman Castellano stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his father's corner office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard waiting for the next move. At 34, he possessed the sharp features of old Italian nobility mixed with the cold calculation of American business. Dark eyes that missed nothing, a jaw that never showed weakness. The Castellano Empire stretched across 3 states, legitimate businesses fronting more profitable ventures that existed in society's gray spaces. Vincent Castellano had built this kingdom from nothing, transforming a small construction company into a sprawling network of enterprises. Construction, waste management, real estate development, private security, all interconnected, all profitable, all requiring the kind of respect that came from understanding power's true nature. Roman had been groomed for this moment since childhood. While other kids play video games, he studied balance sheets. While they went to summer camp, he shadowed department heads, learning every aspect of the business. Vincent had been methodical in his son's education. A king without knowledge is just a target. Roman. Never forget that. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Vincent Castellano, age 61, had suffered a massive heart attack in his study, dead before the paramedics arrived. Roman had driven through empty streets to the family estate, his mind already shifting from grief to necessity. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when hundreds of employees, dozens of operations, and millions in revenue hung in the balance. The funeral was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Legitimate business associates mingled with men whose handshakes carried the weight of unspoken agreements. Politicians offered condolences while mentally recalculating their allegiances. Roman stood at the graveside, his wife Ava beside him in designer black, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive but felt performative. Ava Morrison had entered his life 5 years ago at a charity gala, a striking blonde with a psychology degree from Columbia and an art gallery in Soho. She moved through high society with practiced grace, understanding exactly how much vulnerability to show, how much mystery to maintain. Roman had been captivated by her intelligence, her ability to navigate his world's complexities without flinching. They'd married after a whirlwind 18-month courtship that felt like destiny. But destiny, Roman was learning, was often just camouflage calculation. The company's headquarters occupied 12 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, its clean lines and modern artwork hiding the true nature of its business. Roman's first official day as CEO began with a board meeting at 8 a.m. sharp. 12 faces around the polished conference table, some family, some longtime associates, all supposedly loyal. Frank Torino, his father's oldest friend and the company's CFO, handled the formal transition. Vincent always said this day would come. Roman's been preparing for it his whole life. But Frank's eyes held something Roman couldn't quite identify. Calculation mixed with what might have been pity. The morning moved with mechanical efficiency. Department heads presented status reports, quarterly projections, operational updates. Everything appeared normal, stable, ready for new leadership. Roman signed documents, approved budgets, made decisions with the confidence Vincent had drilled into him. It was during lunch that he noticed the first crack in the facade. His assistant, Maria Santos, a woman who'd worked for Vincent for 15 years, seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact. When he asked about his afternoon schedule, her hands trembled slightly as she handed him the appointment book. "Everything all right, Maria?" "Of course, Mr. Castellano. Just adjusting to the changes." But Roman had learned to read people the way others read newspapers. Maria wasn't adjusting. She was afraid. The afternoon brought more subtle signs. Conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Glances exchanged between longtime employees. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he walked past offices. By 5 p.m., Roman felt like he was walking through a building full of strangers wearing familiar faces. He stayed late that evening, alone in his father's, now his office. The space felt hollow without Vincent's presence, like a theater between performances. Roman opened the safe his father had shown him years ago, finding personal documents, emergency cash, and a sealed envelope marked for Roman's eyes only. Inside, Vincent's handwriting filled 3 pages with names, dates, and detailed observations about loyalty within the organization. The final paragraph hit like a physical blow. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're in charge. Trust no one completely, not even family. Power reveals character, and succession reveals everyone's true intentions. Watch Ava closely. She's been asking too many questions about business operations lately. A beautiful woman with expensive tastes and divided loyalties is more dangerous than any competitor. Remember, respect is earned, fear is given, but betrayal is chosen. Choose your responses accordingly. V. Roman set the letter down with steady hands, though his mind raced. Vincent had suspected something, seen patterns Roman had missed. His father's instincts had kept the empire intact for 30 years. They weren't observations to dismiss lightly. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt longer than usual. Roman's BMW waited in its designated spot, but he took a moment before starting the engine, processing the day's revelations. His father was gone. He was now responsible for an empire built on carefully maintained relationships and precisely calculated risks. And according to Vincent's final message, the people closest to him might be planning his destruction. The drive to their Westchester estate took 45 minutes, giving Roman time to compartmentalize his thoughts. The house sat on 12 acres of manicured landscape, its modern architecture suggesting wealth without ostentation. Ava's Porsche was already in the circular driveway. She'd left the office early for a spa appointment. Roman found her in the living room, perfectly dressed despite supposedly spending the afternoon at a spa, nursing a glass of white wine while scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile that at first captured his attention, warm, genuine, designed to make him forget whatever concerns occupied his mind. "How was your first day as the big boss?" Her tone carried playful affection, but Roman now heard something else underneath. A fishing expedition disguised as wifely interest. "Productive," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Learning the rhythms, understanding the current projects. And, are you going to make changes?" The question came too quickly, with too much focus. Roman studied his wife's face, looking for tells he'd previously missed. "Some adjustments are inevitable." "Why do you ask?" Ava's laugh sounded forced. "Just curious about your plans. This is a big transition for both of us." They ate dinner on the terrace, conversation flowing around safe topics, the weather, weekend plans, renovations Ava wanted to make to the guest house. But Roman found himself analyzing every word, every gesture, every pause. His father's warning had shifted his perspective like adjusting a telescope's focus. Suddenly, details that seemed normal revealed themselves as potentially significant. After dinner, Ava excused herself for a bath, claiming the day had been stressful. Roman retreated to his study, ostensibly to review quarterly reports, but actually to think. Vincent's letter had been specific about Ava asking questions about business operations. Roman replayed recent conversations, looking for patterns he'd missed. 3 weeks ago, she'd asked about the company's private security division. 2 weeks ago, she'd wondered about the real estate holdings in New Jersey. Last week, she'd inquired about Frank Torino's role in day-to-day operations. At the time, these seemed like natural curiosity from a spouse trying to understand her husband's professional life. Now they felt like intelligence gathering. Roman opened his laptop and began reviewing email traffic from the past month, looking for any communication that seemed out of place. His access to the company's internal systems was comprehensive. Vincent had made sure his heir could monitor every aspect of the business. What he found in Ava's email account made his blood run cold. She'd been corresponding with someone using an encrypted messaging service, discussing contingency plans and timeline adjustments. The timestamps showed these conversations had been happening for months, long before Vincent's death. Roman leaned back in his chair, pieces clicking into place like a combination lock. Ava hadn't just been gathering information. She'd been planning for Vincent's death, preparing for the power transition that would leave Roman vulnerable. The house settled around him as night deepened, but Roman remained awake, his mind working through implications and possibilities. His wife, the woman who shared his bed, his secrets, his future plans, had been systematically betraying him while playing the role of supportive spouse. Vincent's final lesson was becoming clear. The most dangerous enemies wore the faces of allies, and the most devastating betrayals came from those granted the deepest trust. Roman closed the laptop and sat in darkness, feeling the weight of his inheritance settling on his shoulders. He now controlled an empire, but discovered his kingdom was riddled with traitors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new tests of his resolve. But tonight, in the silence of his study, Roman Castellano began planning his response to betrayal. His father had taught him that respect and fear were the twin pillars of power. It was time to teach some lessons about both. Chapter 2. The Crown of Thorns. Roman arrived at the office before dawn, the Manhattan streets still quiet except for delivery trucks and early commuters. The building's lobby felt different now. He wasn't Vincent's son visiting the family business, but the man whose decisions would determine everyone's future. The elevator's ascent to the executive floor gave him precious minutes to settle into his new role completely. Maria Santos was already at her desk, steam rising from a fresh cup of coffee. Her surprise at seeing him so early was genuine. Vincent had rarely arrived before 8 a.m. "Good morning, Mr. Castellano. I wasn't expecting you until—" "Plans change, Maria. I need the employee personnel files for all department heads, plus anyone with access to confidential operational information. Have them on my desk in 30 minutes. Her hesitation lasted only a second, but Roman caught it. "Of course, sir. Is there something specific you're looking for?" "Patterns," he replied, watching her face for reactions. "My father always said the devil was in the details." Roman's office, Vincent's office until yesterday, felt more familiar now, like a suit that was finally tailored correctly. He'd spent countless hours here over the years, but always as the heir apparent. Now the weight of actual authority settled around him like armor. The personnel files revealed interesting details. Frank Torino had been requesting access to operational budgets outside his CFO purview. Sandra Walsh, head of human resources, had been making inquiries about executive insurance policies. David Chun, who ran the private security division, had been asking questions about the company's legal representation. Each individual request seemed reasonable in isolation. Together, they painted a picture of people positioning themselves for something significant. Maria returned with coffee and the morning's priority messages. Roman noticed she avoided mentioning his wife, though Ava usually called by this time to wish him luck on important days. The absence felt deliberate rather than accidental. "Has my wife called this morning?" "No, sir." "Should I reach out to Mrs. Castellano?" "That won't be necessary." Roman spent the next 2 hours reviewing the company's organizational structure with fresh eyes. Vincent had built layers of authority that prevented any single person from having complete operational knowledge. But Roman was discovering that several key players had been systematically expanding their access over the past 6 months. The pattern was subtle but clear. Someone had been preparing for a power vacuum, positioning loyal allies to control crucial aspects of the business when Vincent was no longer there to maintain oversight. Frank Torino knocked on his door at 10 a.m. sharp, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of a man about to deliver difficult news. "Roman, we need to discuss some operational concerns that have come up." "What kind of concerns?" Frank settled into the chair across from Roman's desk, his movements careful and measured. "Several department heads have been expressing uncertainty about the transition. Nothing personal, you understand, but your father had very specific ways of handling certain aspects of the business. Meaning some of our more sensitive operations require a particular kind of oversight. Experience with the nuances involved." Frank's tone suggested he was trying to be diplomatic while delivering an ultimatum. Roman leaned back in his chair, studying the man who'd been his father's friend for 3 decades. "Frank, are you suggesting I'm not capable of running my own company?" Not incapable, just inexperienced with certain complexities. Perhaps it would be wise to maintain the current operational structure while you learn the ropes. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, Frank carefully outlining a transition plan that would leave Roman with a CEO title but strip him of actual authority over key operations. It was a polite coup disguised as helpful guidance. "I'll consider your recommendations," Roman said finally, his tone giving no indication of his thoughts. Frank seemed satisfied with this response. "Take your time. These decisions shouldn't be rushed." After Frank left, Roman called David Shun to his office. The security division head was a former Marine who joined the company 5 years ago, bringing military precision to protecting company assets and personnel. Roman had always respected David's straightforward approach. "David, I need you to run background checks on several employees. Quietly, thoroughly, and with complete discretion." David's expression didn't change. "Any particular reason for concern?" "Call it due diligence. I want to understand who's been asking questions about operations outside their departments. Should I include family members in this review?" The question hung between them like a challenge. David knew exactly what he was asking, and his willingness to ask it suggested either complete loyalty or complete betrayal. "Include everyone," Roman said finally. "And David, this conversation never happened." "Understood." Lunchtime brought an unexpected visitor. Ava appeared in his office doorway with takeout from his favorite Italian restaurant, dressed in a way that suggested she'd put considerable thought into her appearance. "Thought you might be too busy to eat," she said, setting containers on his desk with practiced efficiency. "Thoughtful of you." Roman watched her movements, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders. "How was your morning?" "Productive. I had a meeting with the gallery's new investor, then lunch with Diana Morrison." She mentioned her sister casually, but Roman caught the significance. Diana worked for a competing real estate development firm. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Ava shifted to her real purpose. "Frank stopped by the house last night after you went to sleep. He seemed concerned about something." Roman kept his expression neutral. "What kind of concerns?" "He mentioned that some of the senior staff are worried about continuity. Apparently, there are aspects of the business that require specialized knowledge." Ava's choice of words echoed Frank's earlier conversation almost exactly. "And what do you think about these concerns?" Ava's smile was perfectly calibrated, supportive but slightly worried. "I think you're incredibly capable, but maybe there's wisdom in transitioning slowly. Your father built something remarkable, and preserving that legacy should be the priority." Roman finished his meal, while Ava outlined a vision of gradual transition that would keep him safely isolated from real operational control. Her argument was logical, well-rehearsed, and completely designed to neutralize him as a threat to whatever plan was already in motion. "I appreciate your perspective," he said when she finished. "Family support means everything during times like this." Ava's relief was visible. "I'm glad you see it that way. We're in this together, after all." After she left, Roman sat alone with the implications of what he'd just heard. His wife and his father's oldest friend were coordinating their approach, using identical language and arguments. The conspiracy against him was deeper and more organized than he'd initially suspected. David Chin returned at 4 p.m. with preliminary findings that confirmed Roman's worst fears. "Sir, the background checks revealed some interesting patterns. Several employees have been in regular contact with outside parties over the past 6 months. Financial records show unexplained deposits in personal accounts. Phone records indicate coordination that extends beyond normal business relationships." "How many people are we talking about?" "At least 12 in positions of authority, possibly more. The pattern suggests a well-organized effort to undermine your succession." Roman absorbed this information without visible reaction. "And family members?" David's pause spoke volumes before he answered. "Mrs. Castellano has been meeting regularly with Tony Marchetti." The name hit Roman like a physical blow. Tony Marchetti was his cousin, Vincent's nephew, and someone who'd always believed he should inherit control of the family business. More importantly, Tony had been like a brother to Roman growing up. They'd shared secrets, dreams, and ambitions. How regularly? Weekly meetings for the past 3 months. Always in private locations, always using personal vehicles rather than company cars. Roman stared out the window at the city below, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. His wife and his cousin, the two people he'd trusted most completely, had been planning his downfall while he grieved his father's death and prepared to honor Vincent's legacy. David, I need you to arrange comprehensive surveillance on everyone we've discussed. I want to know where they go, who they meet, what they say. Can you handle that without compromising operational security? Absolutely. Should I include contingency plans for if the situation escalates? What kind of contingencies? David's military background showed in his tactical thinking. Physical security for you and your assets. Isolation protocols for hostile actors. Neutralization strategies if necessary. Roman considered this for a long moment. Vincent had always said that business was war conducted by other means, but Roman was beginning to understand that sometimes war was simply war. Prepare the contingencies, but don't implement anything without my direct authorization. Understood, sir. As evening approached, Roman made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. He called his personal attorney, requesting an immediate review of all legal documents related to the company structure, his marriage, and his father's estate. The pieces were becoming clear. Ava and Tony had been preparing for Vincent's death, positioning themselves to manipulate Roman's inexperience and grief. They'd recruited allies within the company, promised benefits to those who supported their coup, and systematically undermined his authority before he'd even assumed it. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed Roman would react with emotion rather than calculation, that grief would make him vulnerable rather than focused. They'd never considered that Vincent's son might possess the same ruthless intelligence that had built the empire they were trying to steal. Roman left the office that evening with a new understanding of his position. He wasn't just inheriting a business. He was inheriting a war that had been planned and prepared during his father's final months. The enemy had taken the field, chosen their positions, and expected easy victory over an unprepared opponent. They were about to discover their mistake. The drive home took him through Queens, past neighborhoods where Vincent had first learned the rules of power and respect. Roman found himself thinking about those early lessons, understanding now why his father had been so insistent on teaching him that loyalty was earned through strength, never through weakness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations about the scope of the conspiracy against him. But tonight, Roman Castellano was no longer Vincent's grieving son. He was a man who'd inherited a crown of thorns and was prepared to wear it. The war for his empire was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Resignations Symphony. Roman entered his office the next morning to find 32 resignation letters arranged on his desk like a coordinated assault. Each envelope was identical. Expensive paper, formal letterhead, precise timing. The symbolism was unmistakable. His supposed allies had chosen this moment to abandon ship, leaving him isolated and presumably powerless. Maria Santos stood in the doorway, her face pale with what Roman now recognized as guilty knowledge. They were delivered by messenger service at 7 a.m., sir. All at once. Roman picked up the first letter, Frank Torino's resignation, effective immediately. The language was professionally respectful, but emotionally cold, citing philosophical differences regarding operational direction and concern for the company's future stability. Sandra Walsh from Human Resources had written 3 paragraphs explaining her difficult decision to pursue other opportunities. David Chin's letter was characteristically brief. Effective immediately, I am resigning my position as head of security. Best wishes for your future endeavors. One by one, Roman read through the carefully crafted betrayals. Department heads, senior managers, longtime family associates, all presenting identical reasoning for their sudden departure. The coordination was flawless, the timing devastating. But Roman felt no devastation. Instead, cold calculation settled over him like armor. His enemies had just revealed themselves completely, abandoning subtlety for dramatic effect. They'd expected shock, panic, desperate attempts to negotiate their return. Instead, they'd given him a comprehensive list of everyone who needed to be destroyed. Maria, cancel all my morning appointments and get my wife on the phone. Tell her I need to see her immediately. Should I try to reach any of the department heads? Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Roman interrupted. They've made their positions clear. Ava arrived within 30 minutes, her expression carefully crafted to suggest concerned confusion. She wore a charcoal gray suit that made her look both professional and sympathetic. The perfect outfit for comforting a husband whose world was supposedly collapsing. Roman, what's happening? Maria said there was some kind of emergency. Roman gestured to the resignation letters spread across his desk. 32 resignations. All delivered this morning. All citing the same concerns about my leadership capabilities. Ava's performance was flawless. Shock, followed by outrage, followed by protective anger. That's outrageous. How dare they abandon you during such a difficult time? Interesting choice of words. Abandon suggests they were ever really with me to begin with. Roman watched his wife process this comment, seeing her recalibrate her approach in real time. What do you mean? I mean, this level of coordination doesn't happen overnight. This has been planned for months. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. The question is whether you're as surprised as you're pretending to be. For just a moment, Ava's mask slipped. Roman saw calculation replace confusion, strategy override emotion. Then the performance resumed, but he'd seen enough. Roman, you're obviously under enormous stress. Maybe you should consider that some of these concerns might be legitimate. Your father had very specific relationships with these people. My father had very specific warnings about certain people. Ava's eyes sharpened. What kind of warnings? Roman stood and walked to the window, letting silence build between them. When he spoke, his voice carried a new edge. Not the grief-stricken son she'd been manipulating, but something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Ava, do you remember our second date? You asked me what I'd learned from my father about business. I told you he taught me that the most important skill in leadership was recognizing when people were lying to you. I remember. What does that have to do with? I'm very good at recognizing lies now. Roman turned to face her directly. And I've been lied to extensively by people I trusted completely. The silence stretched between them like a blade. Ava's composure held, but Roman could see her mind racing through options, assessing risks, preparing new strategies. If you have something to say to me, just say it. Roman smiled. Not the warm expression she was used to, but something cold and predatory. I'm saying that everyone who resigned today made a serious miscalculation. They assumed I'd be weak, that I'd panic, that I'd beg them to reconsider their decisions. And you won't. I don't negotiate with traitors. The word hung between them like a declaration of war. Ava's careful composure finally cracked, revealing the intelligence and calculation that had been hidden beneath years of performance. Roman, you're making a mistake. These people aren't your enemies. They're trying to protect something your father spent his life building. Maybe you should listen to their concerns instead of assuming conspiracy where none exists. Where's Tony? The question came without warning, catching Ava off guard. What? My cousin Tony. Where is he this morning? How would I know where Tony is? Roman opened his desk drawer and pulled out photographs David Chun had provided, images of Ava and Tony meeting in coffee shops, restaurants, parking garages. Months of secret meetings documented in stark black and white. Ava stared at the photos without speaking, her face cycling through emotions before settling on cold resignation. The performance was finally over. How long have you known? Does it matter? Roman spread the photos across his desk like playing cards. The question is whether you're going to continue lying or start explaining. Ava sat down heavily, her careful posture dissolving into something more genuine and infinitely more dangerous. Your father was 71 years old and running a business that required someone half his age. Tony has been handling most of the real operational decisions for the past 2 years. And you thought he should inherit instead of me. I thought the business should be run by someone who understood it completely. Ava's voice carried no apology, only pragmatic calculation. You've been kept away from the sensitive operations, Roman. You know the legitimate businesses, but you don't understand how everything really works. Roman felt pieces clicking into place. So you and Tony decided to stage a coup. We decided to prevent a disaster. Ava leaned forward, her intelligence finally visible without pretense. Roman, there are aspects of this business that could destroy you if handled incorrectly. People who could expose everything if they lost confidence in leadership. Tony knows how to manage those relationships. You don't. Yet, the word carried implications that made Ava pause. What do you mean? I mean that education can be acquired. Relationships can be rebuilt. Trust can be earned. Roman's smile was sharp as broken glass. But betrayal is permanent. Ava stood abruptly, her composure cracking further. Roman, if you're in charge of this company, we're out. All of us. The people who actually keep things running, who understand the real business, who have the connections that matter. You'll be left with an empty building and a pile of legal problems you can't handle. Perfect. The word came without hesitation, carrying such cold finality that Ava's face went pale. No way. Perfect, Roman repeated, standing to face his wife directly. Because now I know exactly who my enemies are, what they're planning, and how they've been positioning themselves. You just handed me a complete list of everyone who needs to be removed. Ava backed toward the door, finally understanding that her husband wasn't the grief-stricken heir she'd been manipulating. Roman, you don't understand what you're doing. These people have information that could what? Destroy me? Expose family secrets? Bring down everything my father built. Roman's laugh was without humor. Ava, do you think Vincent Castellano's son reached adulthood without learning how to handle dangerous people with dangerous information? You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting people who were already planning my destruction. Roman walked around his desk, advancing slowly. But that's a mistake I'll never make again. Ava fumbled for the door handle, her carefully planned coup dissolving into desperate retreat. This isn't over, Roman. You can't run this business alone. I won't be alone. I'll have loyal people around me. People who understand that betrayal has consequences. And what about us? What about our marriage? Roman's expression didn't change. Our marriage ended the moment you started planning with Tony. Everything since then has been theater. Ava left without another word, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Roman remained standing by his window, watching the city below and feeling the weight of absolute clarity. His enemies had revealed themselves completely, abandoning subtlety for what they'd assumed would be a decisive strike. They'd expected panic, negotiation, desperate attempts to maintain relationships that had been poisoned months ago. Instead, they'd freed him from any obligation to show mercy. Roman returned to his desk and began making phone calls. Not to the people who'd resigned. They were already dead to him. Instead, he called contact his father had made over 30 years of careful relationship building. Lawyers, accountants, investigators, security specialists. People who understood that loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished. By noon, Roman had assembled a team of professionals who owed their primary allegiance to Vincent Castellano's memory and his son's future. By evening, he would have comprehensive intelligence on every aspect of the conspiracy against him. And by tomorrow, the war for his empire would begin in earnest. Maria Santos appeared in his doorway as afternoon shadows lengthened across the office. Mr. Castellano? Should I prepare termination paperwork for the employees who resigned? No need, Maria. They've already terminated themselves. Roman looked up from the strategic notes he'd been making. But I do need you to prepare new contracts for their replacements. We're going to rebuild this company with people who understand loyalty and the operational issues they mentioned, the sensitive aspects of the business. Roman's smile was cold as winter. Those will be handled by people who understand that some lessons are only learned once. The Resignations symphony had played its final note. Now it was time for Roman Castellano to compose a very different kind of music, one that would teach his enemies exactly what happened to those who mistook grief for weakness. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Education. Roman spent his first week alone in the building like a detective studying a crime scene. With a mass exodus of senior staff, he had unprecedented access to offices, files, and systems that had previously been compartmentalized. What he discovered painted a picture of systematic preparation for his father's death that went back nearly a year. Frank Torino's office yielded the most damning evidence. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet that Roman opened with his master key were detailed financial projections showing how the company would be restructured under Tony's leadership. Revenue streams Roman had never heard of, client relationships he'd been kept away from, operational procedures that painted his supposed inheritance as merely the legitimate front for something much larger and more complex. Vincent's empire wasn't just construction and waste management. It was a carefully orchestrated network of services that operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, providing solutions for people who couldn't solve problems through conventional means. Private security that occasionally became private enforcement. Real estate development that sometimes required convincing reluctant sellers. Waste management that disposed of more than just garbage. Roman had always known his father's business existed in gray areas, but the scope of operations revealed in these files was staggering. Vincent had built an organization that served as the infrastructure for half the questionable business dealings in 3 states. And Roman had been deliberately kept ignorant of all of it. Sandra Walsh's computer contained correspondence with employment agencies, showing she'd been recruiting Tony's people to replace key personnel months before Vincent's death. David Chin's security files revealed surveillance reports on Roman himself, his movements, his relationships, his potential vulnerabilities documented with clinical precision. But the most devastating discovery came in Ava's personal effects, which she'd left behind in her hurried departure. Hidden in her designer handbag was a burner phone containing text messages that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Roman suspects something. We may need to accelerate the timeline. Ava to Tony, dated 2 days after Vincent's funeral. Frank is nervous about the financial transitions. Make sure he understands his position is secure under new management. Tony to Ava, 3 days ago. Once the resignations are submitted, we'll have 48 hours to consolidate control before he can mount any serious response. Ava to Tony, yesterday morning. Roman sat in his father's chair, reading through months of messages that chronicled his wife's systematic betrayal. The planning had been meticulous, the timeline carefully calibrated, the execution flawless, except for one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed he would react like the sheltered heir they'd kept him as, rather than the predator his father had actually raised. His education in the family business had been deliberate but incomplete. Vincent had taught him legitimate operations, financial management, personnel leadership, strategic thinking, all the skills necessary to run the company's public face. But the deeper operations, the sensitive relationships, the true sources of power had been kept from him until he was ready. Vincent's death had simply come before that education was complete. But Roman was a fast learner, and his enemies had inadvertently provided him with a comprehensive curriculum. He spent 3 days studying every file, every record, every piece of correspondence he could find. Names of clients who required discreet services. Lists of public officials who received monthly consulting fees for unspecified services. Detailed records of problems solved and debts collected through methods that never appeared in official reports. By Thursday, Roman understood exactly what his father had built and how it operated. By Friday, he was ready to begin taking back. His first call was to Albert Morrison, a man whose name appeared frequently in Vincent's private files, but whom Roman had never met. Morrison answered on the second ring with a voice that suggested he'd been expecting this conversation. Roman Castellano. I've been wondering when you'd call. Mr. Morrison, I believe we need to discuss some business arrangements that were interrupted by recent personnel changes. I heard about the resignations. Unfortunate timing. Morrison's tone suggested he understood exactly what those resignations represented. Perhaps we should meet in person. There are matters that require delicate handling. They arranged to meet that evening at a restaurant Morrison specified, an establishment that Roman recognized from his father's private calendar. When he arrived, Morrison was already seated in a back booth that provided privacy and clear sight lines to all entrances. Albert Morrison was 70 years old, distinguished, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power from behind the scenes. His handshake was firm, his eyes calculating, his manner suggesting this was an interview as much as a business meeting. "Your father and I worked together for 25 years. Morrison began without preamble. He solved problems for people who couldn't solve them through conventional means. The question is whether you understand what that really meant. I'm learning. Learning isn't enough in this business. Understanding is essential, but commitment is everything." Morrison leaned forward. "Roman, the services your father provided required absolute discretion, complete reliability, and the kind of judgment that comes from understanding consequences. Can you provide those qualities?" Roman met the older man's gaze directly. "Mr. Morrison, my father's death was the beginning of a carefully planned coup designed to strip me of everything he built. The people who organized that coup made one crucial error. They assumed I'd react with weakness rather than strength. I'm here because I intend to prove them wrong." Morrison smiled for the first time. "Good. Because the alternative to working with you is working with Tony Marchetti, and that boy has always confused ambition with capability." Over the next 2 hours, Morrison outlined a network of relationships that Vincent had spent decades building. Judges who owed favors for problems quietly resolved. Politicians who'd received campaign contributions in exchange for regulatory flexibility. Business leaders who needed assistance with competitors or unions or legal complications that couldn't be addressed through normal channels. Your father never left evidence, never made threats, never did anything that could be traced back to official business. But when people needed certain kinds of problems to disappear, they came to Vincent, and he delivered results. What kinds of problems? The kind that end careers, destroy reputations, or send people to prison if they're not handled correctly. Morrison's expression was serious. "Roman, are you prepared to inherit that level of responsibility?" Roman thought about Ava's betrayal, Tony's coup, the systematic dismantling of everything Vincent had built. He thought about 32 resignations designed to leave him powerless and isolated. He thought about years of being kept from understanding his own heritage. "Mr. Morrison, I'm prepared to inherit everything my father built, and I'm prepared to use it. Then we should discuss your immediate problems." Tony has been reaching out to our mutual contacts, suggesting that the transition wasn't as smooth as originally planned. He's positioning himself as the more experienced alternative. "And what do you think of his position?" Morrison's laugh was cold. "I think Tony Marchetti is an ambitious child who never understood that this business is built on trust earned over decades. He assumes he can inherit Vincent's relationships through intimidation and promises he's not equipped to keep. Meaning he's already made mistakes that are going to cost him dearly. And you're going to help me ensure those costs are extracted properly." Roman felt pieces clicking into place. "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that happen when someone tries to manage sensitive operations without understanding the full scope of what's involved." Morrison leaned back. Tony has been promising continuity to clients while fundamentally misunderstanding how their problems were actually solved. He's created vulnerabilities that your father would never have allowed. Over the next hour, Morrison detailed a situation that was spiraling beyond Tony's control. A federal judge who'd received assistance with a gambling problem was now being pressured for favorable rulings. A city councilman who needed help with a DUI was being asked to approve contracts he couldn't legally support. A construction company owner who'd required labor negotiation assistance was being pushed to accept terms that would expose the entire operation. Tony believes that fear is the only tool necessary for control. He never learned that sustainable power comes from being indispensable rather than threatening. And these clients are becoming nervous. These clients are becoming desperate. And desperate people make terrible decisions that expose everyone involved. Morrison's expression grew serious. "Roman, within 2 weeks, Tony's approach is going to create a crisis that could bring down everything your father built. Unless someone intervenes." Roman understood the opportunity being presented. "What kind of intervention?" "The kind that demonstrates you understand how this business really works. The kind that shows these clients why Vincent Castellano's son is someone they should trust." Morrison smiled. the kind that ensures Tony Marchetti learns the cost of overreaching. They spent another hour discussing specifics, names, dates, leverage points, and strategic approaches. Morrison provided Roman with contact information for Vincent's key clients, along with detailed briefs on their situations and needs. Your father always said that information was the most valuable currency in any negotiation. He collected it carefully, used it sparingly, and never wasted it on personal vendettas. Morrison stood to leave, but he also said that betrayal required consequences severe enough to deter future betrayals. And what kind of consequences did he have in mind? Morrison's smile was sharp as broken glass, the kind that ensure his enemies never forget the lesson. Roman left the restaurant with a comprehensive understanding of both opportunity and responsibility. His enemies had assumed that stripping away the company's senior leadership would leave him powerless. Instead, they'd given him direct access to the true sources of power his father had spent decades cultivating. Tony was overplaying his hand, Ava was overestimating her importance, and Frank was discovering that financial knowledge without operational understanding was worthless. But Roman now had both. The drive home took him through neighborhoods where Vincent had first learned the rules of power and consequence. Roman found himself thinking about those early lessons, understanding now why his father had been so insistent on teaching him that respect was earned through results, not promises. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of his real education in family business. But tonight, Roman Castellano was no longer the sheltered heir his enemies had underestimated. He was a man who'd inherited both an empire and the knowledge to use it. The hunter had become the hunted. Now it was time to reverse those roles permanently. Chapter 5. The Web Unravels. Roman's new understanding of the family business transformed his perspective completely. What had seemed like devastating betrayal now appeared as strategic opportunity. His enemies had isolated themselves from their power base, while providing him with complete intelligence on their plans and capabilities. The key was patient execution rather than emotional reaction. Monday morning brought Roman's first test of his expanded knowledge. Judge Harrison Blackwell called the private number Morrison had provided, his voice tight with anxiety that suggested Tony's inexperience was already creating problems. "I need to speak with Vincent's successor about a sensitive matter that's becoming complicated. This is Roman Castellano. What can I do for you, Your Honor? There's a situation developing that requires the kind of careful handling your father specialized in. Unfortunately, the person who's been representing your organization lately doesn't seem to understand the nuances involved." Roman had studied Judge Blackwell's file over the weekend. Vincent had helped resolve a gambling problem that could have destroyed the judge's career, accepting Blackwell's gratitude in the form of favorable consideration for certain legal matters affecting family business. It was a relationship built on mutual benefit rather than coercion. I understand Tony has been overzealous in his approach. Overzealous is generous. He's demanding rulings that would expose both of us to federal investigation. Your father never asked for anything that would compromise my position. He understood that protecting his assets meant protecting mine. Roman made careful notes, while Blackwell explained the pressure campaign Tony had initiated. Where Vincent had requested occasional favorable scheduling or procedural considerations, Tony was demanding dismissals of serious charges and suppression of evidence that would obviously trigger investigative scrutiny. Your Honor, I apologize for any inappropriate pressure you've received. That approach doesn't reflect our organization's values or strategic thinking. Then you'll call off your cousin? I'll handle the situation personally. And Your Honor, moving forward, any request for assistance will be reasonable, strategic, and mutually beneficial. You have my word. The relief in Blackwell's voice was obvious. Thank you. Your father was a man who understood long-term thinking. I hope you've inherited that perspective. Roman's second call came from City Councilman Paul Hendricks, who'd received Vincent's help with a DUI that could have ended his political career. Tony had been demanding approval for construction contracts that violated multiple city regulations. Kid doesn't understand that some favors cost more than they're worth, Hendricks explained. Vincent knew the difference between influence and exposure. This Tony character seems to think fear is the only tool that matters. By noon, Roman had received similar calls from 6 different contacts. The pattern was consistent. Tony was burning through political capital Vincent had spent years accumulating, demanding immediate returns that would expose the entire network to law enforcement scrutiny. He's acting like a mob enforcer rather than a business strategist, Morrison explained when Roman called to update him. Vincent's approach was surgical. Tony's is sledgehammer. And sledgehammers leave evidence. How long before this creates serious legal problems? FBI opens investigations when patterns become obvious. Tony's demands are creating a pattern that will be visible within weeks. Roman understood the opportunity this created. Tony's aggressive approach was alienating the political network that formed the foundation of family power. If Roman could demonstrate a more sophisticated understanding of these relationships, he could rebuild loyalty while positioning Tony for catastrophic failure. Albert, I need to meet with each of these contacts personally. Face-to-face reassurance that the organization understands long-term strategic thinking. Dangerous territory. If you're seen meeting with judges and politicians so soon after taking control, it could raise questions. Not if the meetings are social rather than business. Vincent attended charity events, political fundraisers, cultural occasions. Natural opportunities for brief conversations that wouldn't attract attention. Morrison's approval was evident in his tone. Your father's son, after all. There's a fundraiser Thursday evening for the Children's Hospital. Half the city council will be there, plus 3 judges and 2 state senators. Roman spent the next 3 days preparing for what amounted to his debut in his father's shadow world. Morrison provided detailed briefs on each contact, their personalities, interests, family situations, and preferred approaches to sensitive conversations. Roman studied the information with the intensity he'd once applied to legitimate business negotiations. Thursday evening's fundraiser was held at the Plaza Hotel, 500 guests, informal attire, supporting pediatric cancer research. Roman arrived fashionably late, allowing him to survey the room and identify key targets before beginning his careful campaign of relationship rebuilding. Judge Blackwell was near the silent auction displays, examining vacation packages with his wife. Roman approached with practiced casualness, purchasing a bid on a weekend in the Hamptons that happened to be adjacent to items the judge was considering. Beautiful evening for a good cause, Roman commented, his tone suggesting polite social conversation rather than business discussion. Indeed, your father was always generous with charitable contributions. Blackwell's response carried layers of meaning. Acknowledgement of Vincent's civic involvement and appreciation for his discreet approach to relationship management. He taught me that community support creates connections that benefit everyone involved. Roman's careful phrasing suggested understanding without explicit acknowledgement of their business relationship. They spent 5 minutes discussing the hospital's needs and the importance of pediatric research. But Blackwell's relaxed demeanor when they parted indicated that Roman had successfully communicated his intention to honor his father's sophisticated approach to political relationships. Similar conversations with Councilman Hendricks, State Senator Patricia Walsh, and 3 other contacts followed throughout the evening. Each interaction was brief, social, and designed to demonstrate that Roman understood the subtle protocols Vincent had established. The key message was consistent. Unlike Tony's aggressive demands, Roman would honor the mutually beneficial relationships his father had built. But the evening's most important encounter was completely unexpected. Roman was leaving the men's room when he nearly collided with Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos, his assistant sister, and someone whose name had appeared frequently in Vincent's private files without explanation. The family resemblance was obvious once Roman knew to look for it. Mr. Castellano, I heard about your recent leadership transition. Detective Santos, I wasn't aware you knew my family's business. Maria Santos studied him with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Your father and I had occasional conversations about matters of mutual interest. Professional courtesy between people who understood the importance of community stability. Roman felt pieces clicking into place. Vincent had cultivated relationships within law enforcement just as carefully as he'd built political connections. Detective Santos wasn't just his assistant sister. She was an intelligence source and early warning system for potential legal problems. I hope those conversations can continue under new management. That depends on whether new management understands the delicate balance your father maintained. Santos's tone carried subtle warning. Some people believe that authority comes from intimidation rather than cooperation. Those people create problems for everyone involved, including law enforcement, especially law enforcement. When someone starts making noise that attracts federal attention, everyone in the area becomes a potential target. Santos glanced around the crowded ballroom. Your cousin has been making a lot of noise lately. Roman understood the warning and the opportunity. Detective, I believe in the same community-focused approach my father practiced. Stability benefits everyone, and instability threatens everyone. Good to hear. Because instability sometimes requires intervention from people who prefer stability. The implication was clear. If Tony's reckless approach created federal heat, Detective Santos would be forced to take protective action that could include targeting anyone associated with family business. I appreciate the heads up. Just friendly advice between community members who want the same things. Roman left the fundraiser with a comprehensive understanding of both the opportunities and dangers facing him. Tony's aggressive approach was creating a window for Roman to rebuild damaged relationships, while positioning his cousin for spectacular failure. But that window was limited. If Tony's recklessness triggered federal investigation, everyone connected to family business would become potential targets. The drive home took him past the construction sites where Vincent had first built legitimate business to support less visible operations. Roman found himself thinking about the careful balance his father had maintained, understanding now why Vincent had been so insistent on teaching him patience and strategic thinking. Roman's education in the shadow world was accelerating, but his real test would come when he moved from rebuilding relationships to actively destroying his enemies. The network Vincent had built would support him, but only if he proved worthy of the trust his father had earned through decades of careful relationship management. The web of conspiracy against him was unraveling, but Roman needed to ensure that when it collapsed completely, his enemies were trapped in the wreckage. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of his campaign, turning Tony's alienated allies against him while positioning himself as the only alternative to catastrophic exposure. The hunter was becoming the predator, and predators required both patience and precision to ensure their prey never escaped. Chapter 6. The Predator's Patience. Roman's strategy crystallized during a sleepless Tuesday night spent studying surveillance reports David Chun had provided before his resignation. Chen's betrayal stung more than the others because Roman had genuinely respected the man's military professionalism. But betrayal often came wrapped in the most convincing packages. The reports revealed that Tony's operation was even more disorganized than Morrison had suggested. His cousin was operating from a warehouse in Queens, surrounded by men whose loyalty had been purchased rather than earned. The surveillance showed a pattern of meetings with increasingly desperate clients, aggressive confrontations with reluctant allies, and strategic mistakes that painted Tony as someone playing far above his understanding. But the most valuable intelligence came from financial records that Chun had apparently copied before his departure. Tony was hemorrhaging money, paying inflated salaries to maintain loyalty while taking on operational costs Vincent had always avoided through careful relationship management. More importantly, Tony was using family business accounts to fund his shadow operation, accounts that Roman, as legitimate CEO, could freeze with a single phone call. Roman made that call Wednesday morning. Frank, I need to discuss some irregularities in our financial systems. Frank Torino's voice carried the weary resignation of a man who'd gambled everything on the wrong horse. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized access to operational accounts, withdrawals that weren't approved through proper channels, the kind of financial mismanagement that could expose the company to regulatory scrutiny. Frank's pause was telling. Roman, perhaps we should meet to discuss this situation properly. I don't think so, Frank. I think you should consider whether continuing to provide financial support for unauthorized operations is worth risking federal banking violations. The threat was subtle but clear. Roman knew about the money trail and was prepared to use it. Frank's response confirmed that Tony's financial position was more precarious than anyone realized. The accounts will be secured immediately. Good. And Frank? My father always said that loyalty was demonstrated through actions, not words. I hope you'll consider that perspective when making future decisions. Roman's next call was to Albert Morrison, who'd been monitoring Tony's deteriorating relationships with increasing satisfaction. Your cousin just lost his primary funding source. How long before that creates operational problems? Days, not weeks. He's been paying people premium rates to maintain loyalty. Without access to family accounts, he'll need to find alternative funding or start losing personnel. And where would he look for alternative funding? Morrison's pause suggested he was considering implications Roman had already calculated. That depends on how desperate he becomes, and how poor his judgment proves to be. Roman understood. Men under financial pressure made decisions they'd never consider under normal circumstances. And Tony's judgment had already proven questionable. Albert, I need you to arrange a meeting with someone who's been causing Tony particular problems. Someone whose situation demonstrates the difference between my approach and his. Judge Blackwell. Perfect. They met Friday evening at Morrison's private club, a discreet establishment that had served powerful men for over a century. Judge Blackwell arrived precisely on time, his manner suggesting this was a conversation he'd been anticipating. Your Honor, thank you for taking the time to discuss this delicate situation. Mr. Castellano, I'll be direct. Your cousin's approach is creating problems that could destroy both our positions. Either this situation gets resolved quickly, or I'll be forced to distance myself from your family entirely. Roman had prepared for this moment carefully, studying Vincent's files on Blackwell and understanding exactly what the judge needed to hear. Your Honor, my father's approach was built on mutual benefit and long-term strategic thinking. He understood that sustainable relationships require protecting all parties involved. Roman leaned forward. Tony's approach reflects inexperience and poor judgment. I intend to correct both problems. How? By demonstrating that Vincent's son understands his father's principles. Roman placed a thin folder on the table between them. Your Honor, the gambling situation that originally brought you into our orbit has been completely resolved. There are no outstanding debts, no ongoing obligations, no continuing vulnerabilities. Blackwell opened the folder to find documentation proving that his gambling debts had been quietly eliminated, not just covered, but erased from the books of every creditor involved. Your father never mentioned this resolution, because he understood that true power comes from solving problems completely rather than using them as leverage. Roman's tone carried Vincent's measured authority. Your Honor, our family doesn't collect judges as assets. We build relationships with people who share our commitment to community stability. Blackwell studied the documents with obvious relief. And what about your cousin's demands? What demands? As far as I'm concerned, you don't owe our family anything beyond the professional courtesy one community leader shows another. The judge's expression transformed from anxious calculation to genuine appreciation. Your father's son indeed. However, Roman continued, his tone sharpening slightly. Tony's reckless behavior has created a situation that threatens everyone involved. I need your help to resolve that situation permanently. What kind of help? Roman placed a second folder on the table. Tony has been making financial demands that violate both banking regulations and federal racketeering statutes. If someone were to file a formal complaint about systematic extortion attempts, Blackwell examined the documents, carefully recorded evidence of Tony's threats and demands, presented in language that would be immediately recognizable to federal prosecutors. This is enough to trigger a RICO investigation, which would expose everyone involved, including people who've done nothing wrong. Roman's expression was serious. Unless the investigation could be narrowly focused on specific individuals who've been operating outside established protocols. The judge understood immediately. A federal investigation that targeted Tony specifically rather than the entire network, would eliminate Roman's primary competitor while protecting the relationships Vincent had built. This would require careful coordination with federal authorities. I have reason to believe federal authorities are already interested in Tony's activities. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos mentioned that his aggressive approach was attracting unwanted attention. Maria Santos is a good cop. If she's concerned about community stability, that's significant. Blackwell closed both folders. What timeline are we discussing? Tony's financial resources have been significantly reduced as of this morning. Desperation leads to increasingly poor judgment. I expect he'll make mistakes within days that will provide the evidence necessary for formal charges. And you're certain this approach will protect the broader network? Roman's smile carried Vincent's cold calculation. Your Honor, my father spent 30 years building relationships based on mutual benefit and strategic thinking. I intend to honor that legacy while removing people who threaten it. They spent another hour discussing details, timing, evidence requirements, protective measures for legitimate business operations. When Judge Blackwell left, Roman felt the satisfaction of a plan clicking into perfect alignment. Tony's aggression had alienated political allies, his financial pressures were mounting, and his operational security was compromised by inexperience. Now federal law enforcement would be watching for the mistakes that desperation would inevitably produce. But Roman's campaign wasn't complete without addressing the personal betrayals that had made this war necessary. Saturday morning brought a call from Ava's divorce attorney, a predictable development that Roman had been preparing for since discovering her conspiracy with Tony. Mr. Castellano, my client, is prepared to discuss an equitable division of assets acquired during your marriage. Your client is prepared to negotiate her surrender terms, you mean? The attorney's pause suggested Ava hadn't been entirely forthcoming about the circumstances of their separation. Perhaps we could meet to discuss this situation more completely. That won't be necessary. Ava chose to abandon our marriage in favor of a conspiracy with my cousin. She's welcome to whatever assets she brought into the relationship, but she won't be taking anything that belongs to my family. Mr. Castellano, New York is an equitable distribution state. Your wife is entitled to. My wife is entitled to whatever a federal judge decides she's entitled to after reviewing evidence of her systematic betrayal of spousal privilege and conspiracy to defraud family business assets. Roman had spent weeks preparing for this conversation, assembling documentation that would make Ava's divorce demands impossible to pursue without exposing her to serious criminal charges. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Your client participated in conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted extortion. If she wants to pursue divorce proceedings, she's welcome to explain those activities to a federal magistrate. The attorney ended the call without further discussion. Within hours, Roman received a text from Ava's personal phone. We need to talk. His response was immediate. No, we don't. By Sunday evening, Roman had successfully isolated Tony financially, positioned him for federal investigation, and neutralized Ava's ability to claim any portion of family assets. The network of relationships Vincent had built was being carefully restored under Roman's leadership, while his enemies found themselves trapped in consequences of their own creation. But the campaign's final phase would require moving beyond defensive strategy to active elimination of threats. Tony's desperation was predictable, but desperate men were often most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. Roman spent Sunday night in his father's study, surrounded by Vincent's private files and strategic notes. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of the end for his enemies, but victory required ensuring they never had opportunity for revenge or recovery. The predator had shown patience. Now it was time to demonstrate precision. Chapter 7. The First Strike. Monday morning brought news that confirmed Roman's strategic assessment. Tony had attempted to rob a legitimate family business account and triggered automatic federal banking alerts. The desperation Roman had predicted was manifesting exactly as planned, but faster than even he had anticipated. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos called Roman's private line at 8 a.m., her voice carrying the professional efficiency of someone delivering expected intelligence. Your cousin made some poor decisions over the weekend. Federal banking investigators are now involved in what started as a simple accounting irregularity. How unfortunate for Tony. How fortunate for people who prefer stable community relationships. Santos's tone suggested this conversation was being recorded for protective purposes. Mr. Castellano, federal investigations have a way of expanding beyond their original scope. Community leaders who demonstrate cooperation and transparency tend to avoid complications. I appreciate the guidance, Detective. Cooperation with legitimate law enforcement has always been our family's policy. Good to hear. There may be opportunities to demonstrate that cooperation in coming days. Roman understood. Federal investigators would want to understand the scope of Tony's unauthorized activities, which would require testimony from legitimate business leaders who'd been injured by his criminal behavior. His second call came from Albert Morrison, whose intelligence network had been monitoring federal activity since Tony's banking violation had triggered automatic alerts. It's moving faster than we anticipated. FBI Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation this morning. They'll want to interview anyone with knowledge of unauthorized account access. And what should those interviews reveal? That Anthony Marchetti has been systematically violating federal banking regulations while claiming to represent family business interests. That his activities were unauthorized, illegal, and conducted without knowledge or approval of legitimate leadership. Roman felt pieces clicking into place with mechanical precision. Albert, I need you to arrange a meeting with whoever's running the federal investigation. I want to demonstrate voluntary cooperation before they start making formal requests. Dangerous territory. Once you start talking to federal agents, every word gets scrutinized. Not if you're providing information rather than defending against allegations. Roman's tone carried Vincent's calculated confidence. I'm not a target of their investigation. I'm a victim of Tony's criminal activities. By noon, Morrison had arranged a meeting with Special Agent Catherine Williams, who was leading the federal financial crimes investigation. Williams agreed to meet at Morrison's law office, suggesting she understood the delicate nature of the situation. Agent Williams was 45 years old, 15 years with the Bureau, and possessed the kind of analytical intelligence that had built a successful career investigating complex financial conspiracies. She arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and the confident manner of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar interviews. Mr. Castellano, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. As you know, we're investigating potential banking violations involving accounts associated with your company. Agent Williams, I'm grateful for the opportunity to clarify the situation. My cousin's unauthorized activities have created serious problems for our legitimate business operations. Williams opened her portfolio and consulted notes that suggested she'd already conducted extensive preliminary investigation. Can you walk me through the account structure and authorization protocols for your company's financial systems? Roman spent 30 minutes providing detailed information about legitimate business operations, account access procedures, and internal controls Vincent had established to prevent unauthorized transactions. He demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of proper protocols while making clear that Tony's activities had violated every established safeguard. Agent Williams, when I discovered unauthorized access to company accounts, I immediately secured the systems and began internal investigation. That's when I learned the scope of my cousin's criminal activities. What kind of activities? Roman provided carefully documented evidence of Tony's unauthorized withdrawals, systematic account manipulation, and attempts to forge authorization documents. The evidence painted a picture of escalating financial crimes that had accelerated after Vincent's death. Mr. Castellano, these documents suggest your cousin was planning some kind of financial takeover of family business assets. Agent Williams, my cousin was attempting systematic theft while claiming to represent family interests. He used his position of trust to commit crimes that have severely damaged our company's reputation and operational capability. Williams reviewed the documents with obvious professional interest. This level of documentation suggests you've been investigating the situation for some time. since the day I discovered unauthorized account activity. My father built this company through legitimate business practices and careful financial management. I won't allow criminal behavior to destroy that legacy. And you're prepared to testify about these findings? Absolutely. Corporate integrity requires cooperation with law enforcement when crimes are discovered. The interview continued for another hour, Williams asking detailed questions about Tony's access to company systems, his relationships with other employees, and the timeline of his unauthorized activities. Roman answered every question completely, providing information that positioned Tony as a criminal acting without authority while demonstrating his own commitment to legitimate business practices. Mr. Castellano, is there anything else you think we should know about this situation? Roman placed a final folder on the table. Agent Williams, I believe my cousin's criminal activities extend beyond simple banking violations. These documents suggest he may have been using company resources to fund illegal operations. Williams examined documentation showing Tony's payments to individuals with serious criminal records, his rental of properties associated with money laundering, and his meetings with known federal targets. The evidence suggested a pattern of criminal activity that extended far beyond unauthorized account access. This is very helpful information. We'll need to investigate these connections thoroughly. Of course. And Agent Williams? If additional evidence comes to light, you'll be contacted immediately. Our family has always believed that cooperation with law enforcement protects legitimate business interests. When Williams left, Roman felt the satisfaction of a plan executing with mechanical precision. Tony's desperation had led him to commit federal crimes that would now trigger comprehensive investigation of his entire operation. The evidence Roman had provided would ensure that investigation focused on Tony's criminal activities rather than legitimate family business. But the afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Ava appeared at Roman's office without announcement, bypassing security through methods that suggested she still maintained allies within the building. She entered his office like she belonged there, her confidence suggesting she believed their relationship provided leverage Roman couldn't ignore. Roman, we need to discuss this situation before it gets completely out of hand. No, we don't. And your presence here demonstrates poor judgment that could be interpreted as criminal trespass. Ava's composure faltered slightly, but she pressed forward with the desperate calculation of someone whose options were rapidly disappearing. Roman, Tony's situation affects both of us. If federal investigators start examining family business operations, everyone gets exposed. Everyone who is involved in criminal activities gets exposed. People who maintained legitimate business practices have nothing to worry about. You think you can just throw Tony to the federal prosecutors and walk away clean? Ava's voice carried the edge of panic. Roman, he knows things about family operations that could implicate everyone. Roman leaned back in his chair, studying his wife with the cold assessment he'd learned from watching Vincent evaluate potential threats. Ava, what exactly do you think Tony knows? He knows about the real business. The services your father provided, the relationships he maintained, the ways problems got solved when legal channels weren't sufficient. And what makes you think federal investigators care about historical business practices when they have comprehensive evidence of current criminal activities? Ava's face went pale as she realized the implications of Roman's question. You set him up. I provided federal investigators with evidence of crimes Tony actually committed. His desperation led him to violate federal banking regulations while attempting to steal company assets. Those aren't fabricated charges. They're documented criminal activities. But the timing was determined by Tony's poor judgment and financial desperation. I simply ensured that when he made inevitable mistakes, appropriate authorities would be notified. Ava stared at him with growing horror as she understood the scope of what Roman had orchestrated. You destroyed him. I protected legitimate family business interests from criminal attack. Tony destroyed himself through greed and inexperience. And what about me? Roman's smile was cold as winter. What about you? You chose to conspire against your husband in favor of a criminal enterprise. Those choices have consequences. Roman, I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can rebuild. No, We can't. Roman stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city where Vincent had built an empire through careful relationship management and strategic thinking. Ava, our marriage ended the moment you started planning with Tony. Everything since then has been theater. I want to make this right. Then you should leave New York. Permanently. Before federal investigators decide your involvement in Tony's criminal activities warrants closer examination. Ava left without another word. Her confident entrance transformed into desperate retreat. Roman watched her go with the satisfaction of a problem finally resolved. By evening, reports from Morrison's intelligence network confirmed that Tony's operation was collapsing. Key personnel were abandoning the warehouse headquarters, federal surveillance teams were monitoring known associates, and Tony himself had disappeared, probably seeking help from contacts who were now more liability than asset. The first strike had achieved every strategic objective. Tony was isolated, financially ruined, and under federal investigation for crimes that would ensure lengthy prison sentences. Ava was neutralized and preparing to flee rather than face potential prosecution. The political network Vincent had built was being carefully restored under Roman's more sophisticated leadership. But Roman understood that wounded enemies were often more dangerous than confident ones. Tony's desperation would lead to increasingly reckless decisions, and desperate men sometimes chose to destroy what they couldn't control. The campaign's next phase would require ensuring that Tony's inevitable final mistakes were contained and directed toward his own destruction rather than broader damage to family interests. The predator had drawn first blood. Now it was time to ensure the prey couldn't escape or retaliate. Chapter 8: The Noose Tightens. Tuesday morning brought confirmation that Tony's situation was deteriorating faster than even Roman had anticipated. Federal surveillance teams had tracked his cousin to a rundown motel in Newark, where he was apparently attempting to coordinate some kind of desperate response to his collapsing empire. But desperation made men unpredictable, and unpredictable men posed risks that required careful management. Roman's first call came from Detective Santos, whose voice carried the urgency of someone dealing with an escalating situation. Your cousin contacted several known criminals overnight. The kind of people who solve problems through violence rather than negotiation. How much of a threat are we discussing? The kind that could create collateral damage if not handled properly. Roman, desperate men with criminal connections sometimes choose to settle scores rather than accept defeat. Roman understood the warning. Tony's connection to violent criminals meant his final moves might target Roman personally rather than limiting themselves to business competition. Detective, what kind of protective measures would you recommend? The kind that demonstrate community leaders take threats seriously while cooperating fully with law enforcement response. Translation: increase personal security while ensuring any violence could be traced directly to Tony's criminal associations rather than legitimate family business. Roman's second call was to Morrison, whose legal expertise would be crucial for navigating the increasingly complex situation. Albert, Tony's desperation is creating potential complications. I need comprehensive legal protection and strategic guidance for managing violent threats. How violent are we talking? The kind that might require physical response rather than legal maneuvering. Morrison's pause suggested he was calculating risks and opportunities with the same analytical precision Vincent had taught Roman to apply to strategic problems. Roman, there are protocols for handling threats from criminal organizations. Legal protocols that protect legitimate business leaders while ensuring appropriate law enforcement response. What kind of protocols? The kind that document threats comprehensively, coordinate with appropriate authorities, and prepare defensive measures that can be completely justified to any later investigation. They spent an hour discussing personal security arrangements, legal documentation requirements, and communication protocols with law enforcement. Morrison's approach was methodical and thorough, designed to ensure Roman's safety while maintaining his position as a legitimate business leader defending against criminal attack. But Roman's most important conversation that morning was with someone he'd never expected to become an ally. David Chun called Roman's private line at 11 a.m., his voice carrying the professional efficiency that had made him valuable before his betrayal. Roman, I need to discuss Tony's current activities. The situation has developed beyond what any of us anticipated. David, you resigned from family employment to join Tony's operation. Why would I discuss anything with you? Because Tony's planning something that could get people killed, including you. Roman felt ice forming in his veins. Explain. Tony hired 3 men from a crew in Brooklyn, professional criminals with experience in targeted violence. He's paying them to send a message about challenging his authority. What kind of message? The permanent kind. Roman, he's lost perspective completely. He believes killing you will consolidate his control over family operations. Roman processed this information with the analytical calm Vincent had drilled into him during countless strategic discussions. Tony's desperation had led him to cross the line from financial crime to planned murder, a development that created both opportunities and enormous dangers. David, why are you telling me this? Because I signed up to work security for a business transition, not to participate in murder. There are lines I won't cross. And what do you expect in return for this intelligence? Nothing. I made poor judgment in supporting Tony's operation, but I won't be party to killing Vincent's son. Roman felt a grudging respect for David's position. What's the timeline? Tonight. Tony's hired guns are planning to intercept you between your office and home. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Location, probably the Queensboro Bridge approach. Limited visibility, multiple escape routes. Easy to stage a car accident that turns violent. Roman spent the next hour coordinating with Morrison and Detective Santos to arrange appropriate response to Tony's planned attack. The legal framework was clear. A legitimate business leader defending against criminal assault had every right to protective measures, including private security and law enforcement coordination. More importantly, Tony's decision to hire professional killers had elevated his criminal activities to a level that would justify federal racketeering charges and potential life sentences. But Roman's response would need to be carefully calibrated to ensure Tony's violent intentions were documented and neutralized without creating broader complications for family business operations. By afternoon, Roman had assembled a comprehensive plan that would turn Tony's assassination attempt into the final evidence needed to destroy him completely. Detective Santos arranged for undercover surveillance of the planned ambush location, ensuring law enforcement would have comprehensive documentation of Tony's criminal conspiracy. Morrison coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure the assassination attempt would trigger additional charges that would eliminate any possibility of Tony ever threatening family interests again. And Roman arranged for private security that would ensure he survived the evening, while providing opportunities for Tony's hired killers to demonstrate their criminal intentions to watching law enforcement. At 6 p.m., Roman left his office following his normal routine, driving his usual route toward the Queensboro Bridge. But his BMW was equipped with bulletproof glass and reinforced armor, while 3 unmarked vehicles carrying federal agents and private security personnel followed at discreet distances. The ambush came exactly where David Chun had predicted. 2 vehicles attempted to box Roman's BMW on the bridge approach, while a third accelerated from behind to force a collision that would disable his car and provide opportunity for the planned assassination. But federal surveillance teams were recording every moment, while Roman security personnel were prepared to respond with overwhelming force. The ambush lasted less than 3 minutes. Tony's hired killers found themselves surrounded by federal agents and private security teams, their weapons confiscated, their communications monitored, and their employer's location tracked through surveillance equipment they hadn't detected. By 8 p.m., Tony Marchetti was in federal custody facing charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, witness intimidation, and financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was comprehensive, and the sentence would ensure he never threatened anyone again. Roman returned to his office that evening to find a message from Agent Williams requesting a meeting to discuss his cooperation with the federal investigation into Tony's criminal organization. The tone suggested appreciation for Roman's assistance rather than suspicion about his activities. But the evening's most satisfying moment came when Roman received a call from Frank Torino, whose voice carried the desperate calculation of a man who'd gambled everything on the wrong side. "Roman, I think there's been some misunderstanding about my position in recent events." "No misunderstanding, Frank. You chose to support a criminal conspiracy against family business interests. That choice has consequences. I was trying to protect the company during a difficult transition. My judgment may have been poor, but my intentions were. Your intentions were to profit from betraying a man who trusted you for 30 years. Frank, there's no coming back from that level of betrayal. Roman, please. I can provide valuable information about Tony's operation, testify about his criminal activities, help ensure he faces appropriate consequences. Frank, Tony is already facing life imprisonment for conspiracy to commit murder. Your testimony won't be necessary." The silence stretched between them before Frank made one final attempt. "What about my family? My pension? 30 years of loyal service." 30 years of loyal service ended the moment you started planning with Tony. Your family will survive your poor judgment, but they'll do it without family business support. Roman ended the call with the satisfaction of a lesson delivered with appropriate finality. Frank's attempt to return to the family fold after Tony's arrest demonstrated exactly why forgiveness was a luxury legitimate business leaders couldn't afford. By midnight, Roman sat in his father's office reviewing reports from federal investigators, private security teams, and Morrison's legal network. Tony was under federal custody, facing charges that would ensure life imprisonment. Ava had fled New York rather than face potential prosecution as a co-conspirator. Frank Torino and other betrayers were isolated and powerless, their careers destroyed by association with criminal activities. The network of relationships Vincent had built was being restored under Roman's leadership, but with improved security and strategic protections that would prevent future betrayals. Most importantly, Roman had demonstrated to everyone watching that Vincent's son possessed the same ruthless intelligence and strategic thinking that had built the empire they'd attempted to steal. The noose had tightened around his enemies' throats with mechanical precision. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of his campaign, ensuring that the lessons learned from Tony's destruction would deter any future challenges to family authority. But tonight, Roman Castellano was no longer the inexperienced heir his enemies had underestimated. He was the undisputed leader of an empire, forged in betrayal and tempered by the necessity of absolute victory. The Predator had proven his dominance. Now, it was time to ensure that dominance was never questioned again. Chapter 9. Perfect Execution. 6 months after Tony's arrest, Roman stood in the renovated conference room of Castellano Industries, addressing a carefully selected group of new senior executives. The morning sun illuminated faces that belonged to people who understood loyalty, competence, and the consequences of betrayal. The transformation of the company had been systematic and complete. Every department head who'd participated in the conspiracy had been replaced by professionals whose backgrounds Morrison had vetted personally. The organizational structure had been redesigned to prevent future coups while maintaining the operational flexibility Vincent had built into family business. Ladies and gentlemen, this company exists because my father understood that sustainable success requires both strategic vision and tactical precision. Moving forward, those principles will guide every decision we make. The new CFO was Maria Santos, Detective Santos's younger sister, whose MBA from Wharton and background in forensic accounting made her ideally suited for managing complex financial operations. Her family connection to law enforcement provided additional security against future legal complications. The new head of security was Colonel James Mitchell, recently retired from military intelligence, whose understanding of operational security and threat assessment far exceeded David Chen's capabilities. Mitchell's background included counterintelligence work that would prove invaluable for protecting family business interests. Sandra Walsh's replacement as head of human resources was Dr. Patricia Novak, whose psychology doctorate and corporate consulting experience gave her sophisticated understanding of personnel management and loyalty assessment. Her hiring protocols would ensure future employees understood family business values before being granted positions of trust. But the morning's most important business was reviewing the final resolution of threats that had emerged during the succession crisis. Colonel Mitchell, please update us on Tony Marchetti's current status. Mitchell consulted his tablet with military precision. Federal prosecutors secured convictions on 15 felony charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, financial fraud, and organized criminal activity. Sentence: for consecutive life, terms without possibility of parole. Currently housed in ADX Florence Maximum Security Facility. Roman felt no satisfaction in his cousin's destruction, only the cold acknowledgement that necessary justice had been served. Tony's attempt to steal Vincent's empire through betrayal and violence had earned him exactly the consequences such actions deserved. And the associates who supported his operation? Frank Torino pled guilty to financial fraud and conspiracy charges. Sentence: 15 years federal prison. David Chun received 10 years for his cooperation in the murder conspiracy. Sandra Walsh accepted a plea agreement for 5 years in exchange for testimony about the financial aspects of the conspiracy. Each name represented a person who'd chosen betrayal over loyalty, personal profit over family honor. Their destructions had been comprehensive and permanent, serving as object lessons for anyone who might consider similar disloyalty in the future. Dr. Novak, what's the status of personnel security protocols? Patricia Novak's response reflected the systematic approach to human resources that Roman had implemented throughout the organization. All current employees have undergone comprehensive background investigation and psychological assessment. New hiring protocols include extensive reference checks, financial review, and graduated access to sensitive information based on demonstrated loyalty over time. And former employees seeking reinstatement. None have been approved. Personnel who participated in the conspiracy have been permanently barred from any association with family business operations. Roman had been approached by dozens of former employees seeking to return to family employment, claiming their involvement with Tony had been coerced or misunderstood. Each request had been denied without consideration. Forgiveness was a luxury that invited future betrayal. Maria, financial recovery status? Maria Santos's report reflected the systematic rebuilding of financial operations under new management. All assets stolen or misappropriated during the conspiracy have been recovered through federal restitution orders. Company reserves have been rebuilt to pre-crisis levels. New financial controls prevent unauthorized access while maintaining operational flexibility. But Roman's most significant achievement had been the complete restoration of political and business relationships that Tony's aggression had damaged. Albert, relationship management update? Morrison smiled with satisfaction that reflected successful completion of a complex campaign. All key political relationships have been restored to pre-crisis levels. Several contacts have expressed appreciation for the professional manner in which recent difficulties were resolved. The network is stronger now than it was under your father's leadership. Judge Blackwell had become one of Roman's most reliable allies, appreciating the sophisticated approach to mutual benefit that contrasted sharply with Tony's crude intimidation tactics. Councilman Hendricks regularly sought Roman's input on municipal issues affecting business interests. State Senator Walsh had invited Roman to participate in economic development initiatives that would benefit family operations. The shadow network Vincent had built through decades of careful relationship management was now functioning under Roman's direction with improved security and strategic coordination. And law enforcement relationships? Detective Santos continues to provide community liaison services that benefit both family business and municipal law enforcement. Federal prosecutors have expressed appreciation for your cooperation during the Tony Marchetti investigation. FBI Financial Crimes Division considers our organization a model for corporate cooperation with federal law enforcement. Roman's decision to present family business as a victim of Tony's criminal conspiracy rather than a participant in questionable activities had positioned the organization as a law enforcement ally rather than a target for investigation. But the meeting's final agenda item addressed the personal consequences of betrayal that had made this transformation necessary. Ava Marchetti's current status? Morrison's expression grew cold. Your former wife relocated to Los Angeles following her divorce filing withdrawal. She's attempting to establish an art gallery using funds she removed from joint accounts before federal asset freezes were implemented. Roman had allowed Ava to escape with a small portion of money she'd accumulated independently, recognizing that completely destroying her would serve no strategic purpose. But escape didn't mean forgiveness. Her business prospects? Limited. Gallery financing has been difficult to secure due to background checks that reveal her involvement in the conspiracy. She's operating on minimal capital with poor prospects for expansion. Roman had ensured that Ava's betrayal would follow her permanently, making success in her chosen field nearly impossible without directly threatening her safety. She would live with the consequences of her choices without enjoying the benefits she'd attempted to steal. The meeting concluded with reports on new business opportunities that Roman's strengthened organization was pursuing, legitimate contracts that built on Vincent's foundation while expanding into areas that would ensure long-term family prosperity. As executives filed out of the conference room, Roman remained standing at the window that offered views of the Manhattan skyline, where Vincent had first taught him to recognize opportunity and assess threats. The empire was secure, stronger than before the succession crisis, and protected by improved security protocols that would prevent future betrayals. The political network was functioning smoothly under leadership that understood sophisticated relationship management. The financial foundations were solid and growing under professional management that prioritized sustainable growth over short-term profit. Most importantly, everyone connected to family business now understood that loyalty was rewarded generously while betrayal was punished without mercy or forgiveness. Roman's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Roman, I made terrible mistakes. Is there any possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation? Ava. His response was immediate. No. The word carried the finality of absolute judgment. Ava had chosen betrayal over loyalty, conspiracy over marriage, personal profit over family honor. Those choices had consequences that would last forever, regardless of regret or desperation. Roman deleted the message and blocked the number, erasing the last connection to a woman who demonstrated that beautiful faces often concealed poisonous intentions. As afternoon shadows lengthened across his office, Roman reviewed the strategic position he'd achieved through systematic destruction of his enemies. Tony would spend the rest of his life in maximum security prison, his criminal empire dismantled and his associates scattered or imprisoned. Frank Torino and other conspirators faced lengthy sentences that would ensure they never threatened family interests again. Ava lived in exile, her betrayal following her like a curse that would prevent success or happiness. The lessons were clear and comprehensive. Loyalty to the Castellano family was rewarded with prosperity and protection, while betrayal was met with destruction so complete that mercy became irrelevant. Roman had inherited Vincent's empire and earned the right to expand it through demonstration of the same ruthless intelligence and strategic thinking that had built the foundation of family power. The succession crisis was over. The empire was secure, and everyone who might consider future challenges understood exactly what happened to those who confused Vincent's son's youth with weakness. Roman Castellano had proven himself worthy of his inheritance through fire and blood, betrayal and vengeance. Now he would build on that foundation with the knowledge that true power came not from fear alone, but from the absolute certainty that betrayal carried consequences too terrible to risk. The war was won. The empire was his. And forgiveness was a luxury he would never offer to those who'd chosen to be his enemies. Perfect execution of perfect justice. Vincent would have been proud. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Last Good Morning. Barrett Shepard woke at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of his daughter singing in the shower. 7-year-old Ada had her mother's voice clear and fearless, though Kara Moses hadn't sung in years, not since the divorce papers were signed 3 years ago. Barrett lay in bed listening, committing the moment to memory the way he'd learned to do with all good things, deliberately, knowing they were fragile. He'd built a career on understanding fragility. As a crisis management consultant, Barrett specialized in pulling people back from the edge, corporate scandals, public relations, nightmares, legal disasters. He'd saved careers, reputations, fortunes. He'd also destroyed a few, but only when they deserved it. The shower shut off. Barrett rose and headed to the kitchen. Their townhouse in Chapel Hill was modest by the standards of his clients, but it was theirs, his, and Ada's. The divorce had been civilized, almost surgical in its precision. Kara got the house in Durham, he got this place, and they shared custody 50-50. Kara had remarried last year to Reed Donovan, a cardiothoracic surgeon with kind eyes and a patient temperament. Barrett liked him. Ada loved him. That should have been harder than it was. "Morning, Dad." Ada bounded into the kitchen, wearing her favorite overalls and a Charlotte Hornets t-shirt. Her dark hair was still damp, pulled into a ponytail that would be lopsided by noon. "Morning, kiddo. Ready for our adventure?" They'd been planning this road trip for months, a weekend drive up the Blue Ridge Parkway, stopping at waterfalls and hiking trails. Just the two of them. Ada had been counting down the days on a homemade calendar, marking each one with increasingly elaborate drawings of mountains. "So, ready? Can we stop at that pancake place in Blowing Rock?" "Absolutely." Barrett poured coffee into his travel mug. "But first, breakfast here. Can't start an adventure on an empty stomach." As Ada demolished a bowl of cereal, Barrett's phone buzzed. A text from Norris Melendez, his business partner. "Heads up. Julius Ashley made parole. Heard he's been asking about you." Barrett's jaw tightened. He hadn't heard that name in 6 years. Julius Ashley. The tech entrepreneur who'd built a healthcare software empire, then used it to defraud insurance companies of $40 million. When whistleblowers came forward, Julius had tried to cover it up, going so far as to threaten them and their families. He'd hired Barrett to make the scandal disappear. Barrett had investigated, discovered Julius wasn't just committing fraud, he was actively tampering with patient data in ways that compromised medical care. People had died because of incorrect medication algorithms. Children had died. So, Barrett had gone to the FBI instead of spinning the story. Julius had screamed, threatened, pleaded. He'd lost everything. His company, his fortune, his freedom. 6 years in federal prison. And now he was out. Barrett deleted the message. Not today. Today was about Ada. About mountains and waterfalls and terrible road trip singing. Earth to Dad. Ada was waving a hand in front of his face. "Sorry, kiddo. Just thinking." "About work?" "Nope. About whether you can handle a 6-hour drive without complaining." "6 hours? You said 4. 4 if we don't stop. 6 with pancakes and waterfall detours." Ada grinned. "Deal." They loaded the car, Barrett's silver Volvo XC90, chosen for its safety ratings with backpacks, snacks, and Ada's stuffed raccoon named Professor Bandit. Barrett did a walk-around inspection, a habit from his days as a teenage mechanic working in his uncle's shop. Tires good. Oil checked last week. Everything perfect. By 8:30, they were on Highway 40, heading west. Ada controlled the music, cycling through a playlist that ranged from Taylor Swift to the Hamilton soundtrack. Barrett sang along badly, earning delighted criticism from his daughter. "Dad, you sound like Professor Bandit trying to bark." "Professor Bandit can't bark. He's a raccoon." "Exactly." The morning sun was bright, the sky cloudless. Barrett felt the tension from Norris's text beginning to fade. Julius was probably in New York or California, rebuilding his life. The man had no reason to come after Barrett after all these years. The FBI had the evidence regardless of Barrett's testimony. It was done. They were 30 miles west of Chapel Hill when Ada first complained about the AC. "Dad, it smells funny." Barrett sniffed. "Funny how?" "Like, I don't know, sweet, but also like medicine." He increased the AC, thinking maybe dust had accumulated in the vents. Better? Yeah, maybe. But 10 minutes later, Ada spoke again, her voice smaller. Dad, my head really hurts, and I feel dizzy. Barrett glanced in the rearview mirror. Ada's face was pale, her eyes unfocused. Ada, look at me. He put on the hazards, looking for a place to pull over. How dizzy? Like you might throw up? Like everything's fuzzy. I don't feel good, Dad. His heartbeat accelerated. Barrett spotted a rest area ahead and took the exit faster than he should have, pulling into a parking spot away from other vehicles. He killed the engine and jumped out, opening Ada's door. Let's get you some fresh air. Ada stumbled out, and Barrett caught her. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. I'm scared, Dad. I know, baby. I've got you. He carried her to a picnic table in the shade, setting her down gently. She leaned against him, trembling. Other travelers glanced over with concern, but no one approached. Barrett's mind raced through possibilities. Motion, sickness, food poisoning, dehydration. But the timeline was wrong for food poisoning, and Ada had never been motion sick before. And that smell she'd mentioned sweet and medicinal. He thought about the AC, about the smell, and suddenly, a cold clarity washed over him. Barrett returned to the Volvo, leaving Ada visible at the picnic table. He popped the hood and stared at the engine compartment. Nothing obviously wrong. He circled to the front passenger side, where the cabin air intake was located. With shaking hands, he unscrewed the access panel below the windshield. Inside the filter housing, wrapped in a clear plastic bag secured with zip ties, was a small pressurized canister connected to a digital timer. The timer's display read 0, but there was a second readout, 0.4 milliliters remaining. Barrett recognized it immediately. He'd seen something similar in a case 3 years ago involving an attempted murder in San Francisco. It was fentanyl, aerosolized fentanyl being pumped directly into the vehicle's air intake. Someone had tried to kill his daughter. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Chapter 2. The Investigation. The rest area transformed into a crime scene within 20 minutes. 2 patrol cars, an ambulance, and a hazmat unit from the county. Ada was given oxygen and naloxone as a precaution, though the EMT said she'd likely only inhaled a small amount before Barrett pulled over. She's lucky, the EMT said, a woman in her 40s named Irma Hood. Another 10, 15 minutes, and we'd be having a different conversation. Barrett sat beside Ada in the ambulance, holding her hand while she breathed through an oxygen mask. Her color had returned, but she was frightened and confused. Someone hurt us, she whispered. Someone tried to, Barrett said carefully. But they failed. You're safe now. Will they try again? It was the question he'd been asking himself. No, I won't let them. Detective Carlo Hanna arrived 40 minutes later, a lean man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a patient demeanor. He spent 10 minutes examining the device in the Volvo before approaching Barrett. Mr. Shepard, I need to ask you some questions. They moved away from the ambulance. Detective Hanna pulled out a notepad. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Barrett had spent the last hour thinking about that question. Julius Ashley was the obvious answer, but he needed to be careful. If he pointed the police toward Julius without evidence, he could be accused of harassment, or worse, giving Julius ammunition for a defamation suit. I'm a crisis management consultant, Barrett began. I've made enemies. People whose careers I've damaged, whose secrets I've exposed. It's the nature of the work. Anyone specific come to mind? Several, but I'd rather not name names until I'm certain. Detective Hanna's expression hardened. Mr. Shepard, someone just tried to murder you and your daughter with military-grade fentanyl. This isn't the time for professional discretion. I understand, but I also know how investigations work. Point you in the wrong direction, and the real perpetrator gets away. Give me 24 hours to make some calls, and I'll have a better answer. It was a gamble. Detective Hanna could push harder, could threaten to charge Barrett with obstruction. But Barrett had learned to read people, and he saw a calculation in the detective's eyes. Hanna was smart enough to know that Barrett's professional network might yield better information than a premature list of suspects. 24 hours, Hannah said finally. But we're seizing your phone records, and we'll be monitoring your vehicle's GPS history. If you're planning something stupid, we'll know. I'm not planning anything except protecting my daughter. After giving his statement, Barrett drove Ada to the hospital in Chapel Hill in a police escort vehicle since the Volvo was evidence. At the ER, they ran a full toxicology screen. The results confirmed minimal fentanyl exposure, not enough to cause lasting damage. Kara arrived at the hospital like a force of nature, Reed trailing behind her. "Oh my God, Ada." She swept their daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. Dad saved me." Over Ada's head, Kara's eyes met Barrett's. In that moment, all the distance between them, the divorce, the separate lives evaporated. She mouthed two words, "Thank you." Reed shook Barrett's hand. "What do you need from us?" "Keep her safe," Barrett said quietly. "I need to figure out who did this, and I can't do that if I'm worried about Ada." "She's staying with us until this is resolved," Kara said firmly. "No arguments." Barrett didn't argue. He kissed Ada goodbye, promised to call every day, and watch them leave. Then he drove Reed's car on loan until Barrett could get a rental back to his townhouse. Inside, Barrett poured 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at his desk. His office was lined with case files, client records, and a wall of photographs documenting his successes. Saving a pharmaceutical CEO from a hostile takeover. Clearing a congressman of false corruption charges, exposing a Ponzi scheme before it collapsed. And there, buried in a file drawer, the Julius Ashley case. Barrett pulled it out and reviewed the details. Julius had been released from federal prison 3 weeks ago. Early release for good behavior. He'd moved to Greensboro, just an hour north of Chapel Hill. His parole conditions included no contact with Barrett or any of the whistleblowers, but parole conditions could be violated. But was Julius capable of this? The man Barrett had known was arrogant and ruthless, but this was different. This was calculated murder. This required planning, resources, connections. Barrett's phone rang. Norris Melendez. "I heard," Norris said without preamble. "Is Ada okay?" "She will be. Someone put fentanyl in my car's AC system." A long silence. "Julius?" "That's my assumption, but I need proof." "What do you need from me?" Norris was more than a business partner. They'd met 15 years ago when Barrett was still a corporate lawyer and Norris was a forensic accountant. They discovered they both had a talent for untangling messes and a low tolerance for corruption. They'd built their consulting firm on those principles. "Everything you can find on Julius since his release," Barrett said. "Bank accounts, associates, phone records, if you can get them. I want to know what he's been doing. That's going to require some gray area work." "I'm aware." "You sure about this? We could let the cops handle it." Barrett thought about Ada's pale face, her frightened eyes. "I'm sure." "Okay. Give me until tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Barrett opened his laptop and began his own research. He started with Julius's known associates, his former business partner, Ernest Rivas, who'd cooperated with the FBI and avoided prison. His ex-wife, Benita Fry, who'd divorced him immediately after his conviction. His attorney, Sandy Bond, who'd failed to keep him out of prison. None of them seemed likely to help Julius get revenge, but someone had. Someone with access to fentanyl, knowledge of cars, and no moral reservations about killing a child. Barrett was still researching at 2 a.m. when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have helped me when you had the chance. Now you'll understand what it means to lose everything." Barrett stared at the message. It wasn't signed, but he didn't need a signature. Julius Ashley had just confirmed himself as the primary suspect. Barrett screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Detective Hannah with a single line. "This is the man who tried to kill my daughter. His name is Julius Ashley." Then he poured another bourbon and began planning his response. Chapter 3. The Pattern. Detective Hannah called at 7 a.m. "We picked up Julius Ashley at his apartment in Greensboro 2 hours ago," he said. "He's denying everything. Says his phone was stolen yesterday." "Convenient." "Very. His lawyer's already screaming about harassment. Claims Julius has been at his parole officer's office, doing community service, the model parolee. We're holding him for 48 hours while we investigate. But unless we find hard evidence, he walks. Barrett dressed and drove to his office in downtown Chapel Hill. The building was a renovated tobacco warehouse, all exposed brick and high ceilings. He found Norris already at his desk, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups. "Tell me you found something," Barrett said. Norris handed him a folder. "Julius has been busy. He's broke. The FBI seized most of his assets, but 3 weeks ago, someone wired him $50,000 from a shell company in the Cayman Islands." "Who owns the company?" "That's where it gets interesting. I traced it back through 6 layers of corporate entities. Final ownership? A woman named Cassandra Haas." Barrett didn't recognize the name. "Who is she?" "She's a pharmaceutical sales executive. 43 years old, lives in Raleigh." But here's the connection. 8 years ago, her brother died from complications after a hospital gave him the wrong medication. Want to guess what software the hospital was using? Ashley MedTech. Bingo. Cassandra sued Julius's company, but lost. The software was working as intended. The hospital staff made the error. She blamed Julius anyway, claimed the interface was intentionally confusing to generate more support fees. Barrett studied Cassandra's photograph. She had severe features, dark eyes that seemed to stare through the camera. "So, Julius gets out of prison," Barrett said slowly, "and Cassandra offers him money to help with his fresh start. But the money comes with strings. She wants revenge on the man who destroyed Julius's company." "Which is you," Norris finished. And Julius, being broke and angry, agrees. It made sense, but it wasn't proof. "We need more. Can you trace the $50,000 to anything specific? Purchase of fentanyl? Maybe." "Already on it. But here's another wrinkle." Norris pulled up a news article on his monitor. 2 months ago, a veterinary clinic in Raleigh was robbed. They took drugs, including a bottle of pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl. The clinic's security footage was wiped. Let me guess, Cassandra works near the clinic? Her office is 6 blocks away. Barrett felt the pieces coming together. She stole the fentanyl, gave Julius money and instructions, and he planted the device. But we still need evidence linking her to the theft or to Julius beyond the wire transfer. His phone rang. Detective Hannah again. "Julius's lawyer just filed for his release. He's got an alibi for the night before your road trip surveillance footage, showing him at a Greensboro bar until 2 a.m. No way he drove to Chapel Hill, rigged your car, and got back in time." "He had help," Barrett said. "A woman named Cassandra Haas. She's the money behind this. I'll look into her." "But Barrett, even if you're right, we need hard evidence. Right now, all we have is a threatening text from a stolen phone and a wire transfer that could be explained away. Unless we find something concrete, both of them walk." After hanging up, Barrett sat in silence. He'd spent his career digging up dirt, finding the connections others missed. But this was different. This was personal. And the law was moving too slowly. "I have an idea," Norris said carefully. "But you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "We can't prove they did it, but we can make them prove they didn't. We set a trap. We make them think you're vulnerable. See if they try again. This time with the cops watching." Barrett shook his head. "Too risky. If something goes wrong, then we do what we do best. We investigate them until we find something that sticks. Pull every thread. Expose every secret. They made this personal. We make it professional." Over the next 3 days, Barrett and Norris worked around the clock. They pulled Cassandra's financial records legally through a forensic accountant who owed them a favor. They interviewed employees at the veterinary clinic. They tracked Julius's movements since his release. The pattern emerged slowly but clearly. Cassandra had been planning this for months, possibly years. She'd researched Julius in prison, established contact, offered him a partnership. When he was released, she'd funded his new life not out of kindness, but as an investment. She wanted revenge on Barrett, and Julius wanted the same. Together, they'd become dangerous. But they'd also become sloppy. The veterinary clinic employee who'd accidentally left a window unlocked the night of the robbery? She received a $5,000 deposit 2 days later from one of Cassandra's shell companies. The auto repair shop where Barrett's car had been serviced 2 days before the road trip, Julius had been seen in the parking lot. though he'd left when the owner approached. And most damningly, Cassandra's phone records showed 17 calls to a burner phone whose GPS location matched Julius's movements perfectly. Barrett compiled everything into a dossier and delivered it to Detective Hannah. "This is good work," Hannah admitted. "Circumstantial, but compelling. I'll bring them both in for questioning. And if they lawyer up and stay silent, then we keep digging. These cases take time, Barrett." But Barrett was done waiting. He protected his daughter, gathered evidence, played by the rules. Now it was time to play a different game. That night, Barrett made a call to a client from 3 years ago, a woman named Blanca Humphrey, who ran an investigative journalism outfit. She owed him. He'd saved her from a lawsuit that would have bankrupted her operation. "I need you to run a story," he said, "about a pharmaceutical executive who's been funding revenge schemes. About a tech entrepreneur who's violated parole to commit attempted murder. I'll give you everything: documents, witnesses, recordings." "This is the kind of story that ruins lives," Blanca said. "That's the idea." The article ran online the next morning. By noon, it had gone viral. By evening, Cassandra Haas's pharmaceutical company had suspended her pending an investigation. Julius Ashley's parole officer had requested an emergency hearing, and Barrett received a call from an unknown number. "You've made a terrible mistake." Cassandra's voice was ice cold. "You think this is over? It's just beginning." "Then let's finish it," Barrett said. "You tried to kill my daughter. Now, I'm going to destroy everything you value. Your career, your reputation, your freedom. And when I'm done, everyone will know exactly what you are." He hung up and smiled. The game was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Counterattack. The article Blanca published didn't just go viral, it detonated. Within 48 hours, 3 major news outlets had picked up the story. Cassandra Haas's pharmaceutical company fired her. Julius Ashley was back in custody for violating parole, and Barrett's phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests. He declined them all. Ada was safe with Kara and Reed. The police had enough evidence to build a case. Barrett should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt hollow. The trap he'd set had worked, but Cassandra's threat lingered in his mind. "You think this is over? It's just beginning." At his office, Norris was celebrating with expensive whiskey. "We did it," Norris said, pouring 2 glasses. "They're finished. Cassandra will face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit murder. Julius is looking at another decade in prison for parole violation. You won. Ada's safe. That's what matters." Barrett accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Something's wrong." "What do you mean?" "Cassandra is not stupid. Neither is Julius. They had to know that trying to kill me would bring this kind of heat. So why risk it? What was the end game?" "Revenge. That's the end game." "No." Barrett pulled up Cassandra's photograph on his computer. "Revenge is emotional, irrational. Everything about this plan was calculated. The fentanyl theft, the wire transfers through shell companies, the timing. This woman spent months planning. She wouldn't do all that just to make Julius happy." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we're missing something." Barrett spent the evening reviewing every file, every document. Around midnight, he found a detail so small he'd almost missed it. 3 months ago, Cassandra had purchased a life insurance policy on her brother, Matthew Haas, who had died 8 years earlier. Not unusual, people do maintain policies on deceased relatives for various reasons. But this policy was different. It was a modified version that paid out only if new evidence of wrongful death emerged. And the beneficiary wasn't Cassandra. It was a foundation she'd created called the Matthew Haas Memorial Trust. Barrett dug deeper into the foundation. It was registered as a nonprofit dedicated to medical software safety advocacy. But its financials were strange. It had one major investor, a venture capital firm called Meridian Holdings. Meridian Holdings owned 12 companies, all in the healthcare space. And its CEO was someone Barrett recognized, Ernest Rivas, Julius's former business partner who'd cooperated with the FBI. The pieces rearranged themselves in Barrett's mind. This wasn't just revenge. This was a con. Ernest had cooperated with the FBI to avoid prison, but he'd also positioned himself to acquire Julius's company assets at a fraction of their value. Now, he was rebuilding the empire, but he needed capital. Cassandra's foundation, funded by a wrongful death claim against the dissolved Ashley MedTech company, could provide that capital if she could prove Julius had been negligent. But the original investigation had cleared the software. The only way to reopen the case was to prove Julius was still dangerous, still causing harm. Enter the attempted murder of Barrett Shepard and his daughter. If successful, it would have looked like Julius was continuing his pattern of recklessness with human life. Even if unsuccessful, the publicity would be enough to support a civil suit claiming continued pattern of negligence and endangerment. Cassandra would get her payout, Ernest would get his funding, and Julius, the useful idiot, would spend the rest of his life in prison. Barrett called Norris at 1 a.m. "We've been played," he said. "This was never about revenge. It's about money." He explained his theory. Norris was silent for a long moment. "If you're right, then Ernest Rivas is the one who orchestrated everything. Cassandra and Julius are just pawns. Which means Ernest is still out there, and he has no reason to stop. If this plan failed, he'll try something else. What do we do?" Barrett thought about Ada, safe in Kara's house. Thought about Cassandra and Julius in custody. Thought about Ernest Rivas, hiding behind layers of corporate entities and charitable foundations. "We prove it," Barrett said, "and then we destroy him." The next morning, Barrett reached out to someone he'd hoped never to contact again, his former mentor, Carol Morrison. Carol had taught Barrett everything about crisis management, how to read people, how to manipulate narratives, how to win. But Carol had also taught him when to cross lines, when ethics were negotiable. Barrett had walked away from that philosophy and built his own firm on different principles. Now, he needed Carol's particular expertise. They met at a diner outside Raleigh. Carol looked older, his hair completely gray, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Barrett Shepard," Carol said, shaking his hand. "I heard about your daughter. I'm sorry. I need your help." Finally ready to play the game properly? Barrett bristled. "I need information on Ernest Rivas. He's behind what happened to Ada." Carol nodded slowly. "Ernest. I know him. He consulted with me about a year ago, wanted advice on reputation rehabilitation. I told him the best way to rehabilitate a reputation is to never damage it in the first place." "What did he want specifically?" "He wanted to position himself as a victim of Julius Ashley's schemes. Wanted media training, talking points, the whole package. I turned him down because I could tell he was lying. Whatever happened with Julius, Ernest was complicit." "He's planning something bigger now," Barrett said. He explained the insurance scheme, the foundation, the connections to Cassandra. Carol listened carefully. "Smart. Risky, but smart. The problem is proving it. Ernest has insulated himself too well. You'd need someone on the inside, someone who could get you concrete evidence of coordination between Ernest and Cassandra. I'm open to suggestions. There's a lawyer who works for Meridian Holdings, woman named Joni Werner. She does all their contract work, including the paperwork for Cassandra's foundation. If there's evidence of the scheme, she has access to it." "Will she talk?" Carol smiled. "That depends on what you offer her. Joni's ambitious. She wants to make partner at a big firm, but Meridian's keeping her as a glorified document processor. Give her a chance to be the hero who exposed corporate fraud, and she might cooperate." Barrett met Joni Werner 3 days later at a coffee shop in downtown Raleigh. She was 32, sharp-featured, with the wary eyes of someone who'd been disappointed by the law more than once. "Mr. Shepard," she said cautiously, "I'm not sure why you wanted to meet." Barrett laid out his theory simply and directly. Joni's expression shifted from skepticism to interest to alarm. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "then Ernest has been using my legal work to facilitate attempted murder." "That's exactly what I'm saying, and I need proof. Internal documents, emails, anything that shows coordination between Ernest and Cassandra. I could lose my license, go to jail. Or you could be the whistleblower who helped prosecute a conspiracy to commit murder. Your choice." Joni was silent for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone. "I'm going to regret this." Chapter 5. The Evidence. Joni Werner delivered the documents 3 days later. Barrett and Norris reviewed them in the office, spreading printouts across the conference table. The paper trail was damning. Emails between Ernest and Cassandra, dating back 18 months, discussing opportunities for mutual benefit. A contract between Meridian Holdings and the Matthew Haas Memorial Trust, promising funding contingent on successful resolution of pending litigation. And most critically, a memo from Ernest to Cassandra with the subject line, Barrett Shepard, Timeline and Strategy. The memo outlined the entire plan. Recruit Julius upon his release, fund the attack on Barrett, use the publicity to support a wrongful death claim, leverage the claim for foundation funding. There was even a contingency plan if Barrett survived. Subject's credibility may be compromised through targeted media campaign portraying him as paranoid, vengeful. This alternative approach carries less risk and may yield similar litigation advantages. This is it, Norris said, reading the memo for the third time. This proves everything. Barrett was already on the phone with Detective Hannah. I'm emailing you documents that prove Ernest Rivas orchestrated the attempt on my daughter's life. You need to arrest him immediately. Barrett, I can't just arrest someone because... Read the emails. He laid out the entire plan in writing. He's the puppet master. Julius and Cassandra were just following his script. There was a long pause. Send everything you have. I'll review it and consult with the DA. Barrett sent the files and then sat back, exhausted. They'd done it. They had the evidence. The system would work. Except the system didn't work. 2 days later, Detective Hannah called with bad news. The DA won't prosecute Ernest based on these documents. What? Why? The emails are ambiguous. His lawyers are arguing the Barrett Shepard memo was about a legitimate business strategy for responding to negative press, not about orchestrating murder. The contract with Cassandra's foundation is legal on its face. Without direct evidence that Ernest ordered the attack, we can't charge him with conspiracy. That's insane. The timeline alone proves. I know. But the DA thinks a jury would have reasonable doubt. Ernest has no direct connection to the fentanyl, to Julius's movements, to anything concrete. He's 3 layers removed from the actual crime. Barrett felt rage building in his chest. So, he walks? Unless you find something more explicit, yes. He walks. After hanging up, Barrett threw his coffee mug across the room. It shattered against the brick wall. This is exactly what he planned for, Norris said quietly. He insulated himself. Even if we expose the connection, the law can't touch him. Barrett thought about Ada, about how close he'd come to losing her, about Ernest Rivas sitting in his office, celebrating his cleverness. The law can't touch him, Barrett repeated. But I can. Barrett. He tried to kill my daughter, Norris. He orchestrated the whole thing, and he's going to walk away because he was smart enough to use intermediaries. You think I'm going to let that stand? What are you going to do? Barrett didn't answer immediately. He thought about his career, his reputation, everything he'd built. He thought about the rules he'd followed, the lines he'd never crossed. Then he thought about Ada's frightened eyes in that ambulance. I'm going to give Ernest exactly what he gave me, Barrett said. A nightmare he can't escape. Over the next week, Barrett became someone he didn't fully recognize. He called in every favor, leveraged every connection, used every trick Carol Morrison had taught him and a few Carol didn't know. First, he leaked the documents Joni had provided to 3 different investigative journalists. The stories that emerged painted Ernest as a sociopath who'd sacrificed his former partner and targeted a child to make money. Then, Barrett contacted every company in Meridian Holdings' portfolio. He provided evidence of Ernest's scheme, suggested that investing with someone willing to orchestrate murder was a liability risk. Within days, 4 companies pulled their funding. But that wasn't enough. Barrett created a website anonymous, untraceable, dedicated to exposing Ernest's crimes. He hired private investigators to follow Ernest, document his movements, find any additional dirt. He sent the information to Ernest's neighbors, his business associates, his family. He systematically destroyed Ernest's reputation, his business, his peace of mind. And when Ernest tried to fight back with lawsuits, Barrett was ready. He documented everything, ensured every action was technically legal. Ernest's lawyers found themselves fighting ghosts. 3 weeks into Barrett's campaign, Ernest called him directly. "You're destroying my life," Ernest said, his voice shaking. Yes, Barrett said calmly. That's the idea. I could have you killed. I have connections, resources. No, you don't. I've already made sure of that. Your investors are gone. Your companies are failing. Your reputation is ash. You're alone, Ernest. And you're going to stay that way. The police can't prove I did anything. I don't need the police to prove it. I just need the world to believe it. And they do. You're finished. There was silence on the line. Then Ernest whispered, What do you want? I want you to confess. Every detail. Recorded, signed. Give me that, and I'll stop. And if I don't, then I keep going until you have nothing left. Not your money, not your freedom, not your sanity. Your choice. The line went dead. But 2 days later, Barrett received a package. Inside was a USB drive containing a video confession, Ernest admitting to orchestrating the attack, to manipulating Julius and Cassandra, to everything. Barrett watched it once, then called Detective Hannah. I have what you need, he said. Chapter 6. The Price. Ernest Rivas was arrested on a Tuesday morning. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and criminal racketeering. His bail was set at $5 million, which he couldn't make. Julius Ashley, confronted with Ernest's confession, agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cassandra Haas did the same. The DA promised that all three would spend significant time in prison. Barrett should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. At Kara's house, he sat in the backyard watching Ada play with Reed's golden retriever. She seemed happy, unburdened by the knowledge of what had almost happened to her. Kara brought him a beer and sat down. She's been asking about you, Kara said. Wants to know when you're taking her on another road trip. Soon, Barrett said. When this is really over. It is over, Barrett. They're all in custody. He shook his head. It's not over until I know Ada's completely safe. Until I know no one else is out there planning another attack. You can't control everything. I can try. Kara studied him carefully. You've changed. I can see it. Whatever you did to make Ernest confess, it wasn't just about justice. Was it? Barrett met her eyes. No, it was about revenge. And, do you feel better? He thought about that. I feel like I protected my daughter. That's enough. But it wasn't enough. Barrett knew that. He'd crossed lines, used methods he'd always avoided. He'd become the kind of person he'd spent his career fighting against. Back at his office, Norris was waiting. We need to talk, Norris said. About what? About this. Norris pulled up an article on his computer. It was about Barrett, titled The Crisis Manager Who Became a Vigilante. The article detailed Barrett's campaign against Ernest, painting it as unethical and possibly illegal. They're coming after you, Norris said. Ernest's lawyers are claiming you coerced his confession through harassment. They're trying to get it thrown out. Let them try. I have documentation showing everything I did was legal. Legal doesn't mean ethical, Barrett. You crossed lines. You know you did. I'd cross them again to protect Ada. I know. That's what worries me. Norris stood up. I'm not judging you. What you did worked. But it changed something. In you. In how people see us. We built this firm on integrity. And now, I don't know what we are anymore. Barrett felt anger rising. We're people who get results. We're people who don't let monsters hide behind technicalities. We're people who became what we fought against. The words hung in the air like an accusation. That night, Barrett couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Norris's words, about the person he'd become. He'd won. Ada was safe. The bad guys were in custody. But the victory tasted like ashes. At 3 a.m., his phone rang. Detective Hannah. You need to come to the station, Hannah said. Now. What happened? Ernest Rivas tried to hang himself in his cell an hour ago. He's alive, but barely. And he left a note. You need to see it. Barrett drove to the police station in a daze. In an interview room, Hannah showed him a photograph of the note, written in shaky handwriting. I did it all. But Barrett Shepard is worse than me. He destroyed my life for revenge, not justice. Who's the real monster? Barrett stared at the words. Is he right? Hannah asked quietly. I don't know, Barrett admitted. When he got home, the sun was rising. Barrett sat on his porch, drinking coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. His phone buzzed. A text from Ada. Love you, Dad. Can't wait for our next adventure. Barrett smiled despite everything. That's what mattered. Not Ernest's words, not Norris's doubts, not the articles questioning his methods. Ada was safe. She was happy. She loved him. That was enough. It had to be enough. Chapter 7. The Trap. 3 months after Ernest's arrest, Barrett received an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You missed one." The email contained a single attachment, a photograph of Ada walking to school with Kara. Barrett's blood ran cold. He immediately called Kara. "Get Ada and go to Reed's hospital," he said urgently. "Stay in his office. I'm calling the police." Barrett? What's? Just do it. Now. He forwarded the email to Detective Hannah and then called Norris. "Someone else is involved," Barrett said. "Someone we missed." "That's impossible. We tracked everyone connected to Ernest." "Apparently, not everyone." Barrett spent the next hour reviewing every file, every connection. Then he found it buried in Ernest's financial records. A payment to someone called RS Consulting made 6 months ago. $20,000. RS. Those initials were familiar. Barrett pulled up the list of names from the Julius Ashley case. And there it was, Roscoe Strickland, the former IT director at Ashley MedTech. He'd been fired when the company collapsed, but had never faced criminal charges. Barrett had forgotten about him entirely. A quick search revealed Roscoe now ran a cybersecurity consulting firm in Durham. Barrett called immediately, but got voicemail. He drove to the office address listed online, a small building in Research Triangle Park. The office was empty, recently vacated. On the desk, Barrett found a note. "You ruined my life twice. Once when you destroyed Ashley MedTech, again when you went after Ernest. Now it's my turn." Barrett's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Barrett." Roscoe's voice was calm, almost cheerful. "I wanted to make sure you got my message." "What do you want?" "The same thing you wanted from Ernest. Justice. Revenge. Whatever you want to call it. I'll find you. I'm sure you'll try. But I'm better at hiding than Ernest was. Better at planning too. You see, I've spent 3 months studying you, learning your patterns. I know where Ada goes to school, where Kara works, where Reed operates. I know everything." Barrett felt his chest tighten. "If you touch my daughter, I'm not going to touch her. Yet. First, I'm going to make you suffer the way you made me suffer. I'm going to destroy everything you care about. You won't get away with this." "I already have." The line went dead. Barrett immediately contacted Detective Hannah, explained the situation. Police were dispatched to protect Kara, Reed, and Ada, but Roscoe had vanished. Over the next week, strange things began happening. Barrett's office was broken into, though nothing was stolen. His car was vandalized. His clients received anonymous emails making false accusations about his ethics. And every few days, he'd receive another photograph. Ada at a park, Kara at a grocery store, Reed leaving the hospital. Roscoe was everywhere and nowhere, taunting him. "We need to draw him out," Norris said. "Set a trap." "How? He's not stupid enough to come after me directly." "No, but he might be arrogant enough to try proving he's smarter than you." Barrett thought about that. Roscoe was an IT expert, someone who understood systems and security. He'd been humiliated twice, once by the FBI investigation, once by Barrett's campaign against Ernest. His ego was fragile. "We make him think he's won," Barrett said slowly. "We give him a target he can't resist." They crafted a plan. Barrett would hold a press conference announcing his retirement from crisis management, claiming the Ernest Rivas case had broken him. He'd position himself as defeated, vulnerable. The press conference was held at a hotel in Raleigh. Barrett delivered his prepared statement, his voice shaking convincingly. "The last few months have taken their toll," he said to the assembled reporters. "I crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed. I hurt people in the name of protecting my daughter. I can't do this work anymore." The performance was perfect. That night, the story ran on every news outlet. Barrett Shepard, the man who'd taken down Ernest Rivas, was admitting defeat. 2 days later, Barrett received an email from Roscoe. "Meet me at the place where Julius fell. Midnight tonight. Come alone, or Ada dies." The place where Julius fell, the parking garage, where Julius had been arrested 3 months ago. Barrett showed the email to Detective Hannah. "It's a trap," Hannah said. "I know, but it's also our chance." He's getting cocky. "We can have a full tactical team in position." "No. If he sees police, he'll disappear again. We do this my way." That night, Barrett drove to the parking garage. It was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered across multiple levels. He parked on the 3rd floor and walked to the spot where Julius had been arrested. Roscoe was waiting, leaning against a concrete pillar. He was in his 40s, thin, with nervous energy. "You came," Roscoe said. "You threatened my daughter." "Of course I came." "Good. I wanted to see your face when I tell you what I've done." Roscoe pulled out a phone. "This has access to your computer, your email, your bank accounts. I've documented every questionable thing you've done in the last 3 months. And tomorrow, I'm releasing all of it to the press." "Why?" "Because you need to understand what it's like to lose everything. Your reputation, your business, your integrity. Just like I lost mine." Barrett stepped closer. "Ernest used you. Julius used you. You're not a victim, Roscoe. You're a collaborator. I was trying to save the company. The software wasn't flawed, the hospitals were using it wrong. But no one wanted to hear that. They wanted a villain, and Julius became one. And you? You made sure of it. Julius killed people through negligence. You helped cover it up. And you destroyed innocent lives for revenge." Roscoe's hand was shaking. "You're no better than any of us." "Maybe," Barrett said quietly, "but I'm still standing, and you're about to go to prison." Roscoe laughed. "You think the police are here? I've been monitoring every frequency. This building is empty except for us." "You're right about that." Barrett pulled out his own phone. "But you're wrong about being safe." On the screen was a live video feed showing Roscoe from multiple angles. Cameras that Barrett had installed the previous night, hidden throughout the garage. "Every word you've said has been recorded," Barrett continued, "including your confession to hacking my systems, to stalking my family, to threatening my daughter. You wanted to prove you were smarter than me. Instead, you gave me everything I needed to destroy you." Roscoe's face went pale. You planned this. Every detail. The press conference, the fake defeat, this meeting. I knew you couldn't resist gloating. That's your weakness, Roscoe. You need validation." Police sirens echoed through the garage. Roscoe looked around wildly, then ran for the stairs. But Detective Hannah was already there, weapon drawn. "Roscoe Strickland, you're under arrest." As police handcuffed Roscoe, he screamed at Barrett. "You're a monster. You manipulate everyone." Barrett walked over and looked him in the eyes. "I'm a father who protects his daughter, and you're a fool who underestimated me." Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Roscoe Strickland's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession, the hacking tools found at his apartment, the threatening emails. He was convicted of cyberstalking, harassment, and attempted extortion. Judge Sybil Rios gave him 5 years in federal prison. At the sentencing, Barrett sat in the courtroom gallery. Roscoe turned to look at him one final time. "Was it worth it?" Roscoe asked. "Becoming what you hated?" Barrett didn't answer. He didn't need to. But the question haunted him as he drove back to Chapel Hill. He'd won every battle. Julius was serving 20 years. Ernest had received 40 years after his suicide attempt failed. Cassandra had gotten 15 years with a chance for parole. And now Roscoe was heading to prison too. Barrett had protected Ada, exposed corruption, delivered justice. But he'd also crossed lines he'd once considered sacred. He'd manipulated people, destroyed reputations, used tactics he'd criticized in others. The firm he'd built on integrity now operated in shades of gray. At his office, Norris was packing boxes. "What are you doing?" Barrett asked. "Leaving," Norris said quietly. "I'm sorry, Barrett. I can't do this anymore." "Because of what happened with Roscoe?" "Because of all of it. You got results. Ada's safe. But the methods, they changed you, changed us. This isn't the firm I wanted to build. Barrett felt something crack inside him. So, you're just walking away? I'm walking towards something better, something cleaner. Norris met his eyes. I'm not judging you, Barrett. What you did to protect Ada. I understand it. But I can't be part of it anymore. After Norris left, Barrett sat alone in the office. The walls were covered with photographs of successful cases, satisfied clients, problems solved. But now they looked different. Each victory had required compromise, required him to become a little more like the people he was fighting. His phone rang. Kara. Ada wants to see you, she said. She's been asking all week. Barrett drove to Kara's house. Ada ran out to meet him, throwing her arms around his waist. Dad, you haven't visited in forever. I know, kiddo. I've been busy. With work? With work. They sat on the porch swing, Ada chattering about school, about her friends, about the book she was reading. Barrett listened, really listened, trying to remember when he'd last done this without thinking about cases and enemies and revenge. Dad? Ada looked up at him. Are the bad people all gone now? Yes. They're all gone. Good. She hugged him tighter. I was scared for a while, but I knew you'd keep me safe. You always do. Barrett felt tears threatening. Always, kiddo, always. That night, alone in his townhouse, Barrett made a decision. He called Carol Morrison. I need to shut down the firm, Barrett said. What? Why? Because Norris was right. I became what I fought against, and if I keep going, I'll keep sinking deeper. So, what will you do? I don't know yet. Something different. Something that doesn't require me to destroy people. Carol was silent for a moment. You did good work, Barrett. You protected your daughter. Don't let guilt poison that. I'm not guilty about protecting Ada. I'm guilty about enjoying it. About how easy it became to hurt people. Then stop, Carol said simply. You proved you can play dirty. Now prove you can stop. The next morning, Barrett met with his remaining clients and referred them to other consultants. He filed paperwork to dissolve the firm. He cleared out his office, boxing up 15 years of work. On his last day, he found a note taped to his desk. It was from Norris. You're a good man who did what he had to do. Don't forget that. But don't forget who you wanted to be, either. There's still time to become him. Barrett folded the note and put it in his pocket. Outside, the sun was setting. Barrett drove to Ada's school and waited in the pickup line. When she came out, she was surprised to see him. Dad, what are you doing here? I thought we could get ice cream. Just the two of us. Really? But it's a school night. Sometimes school nights need ice cream. They went to Ada's favorite place, a local shop with absurd flavors like Unicorn Dreams and Cookie Monster Chaos. Ada ordered a triple scoop. Barrett got vanilla. As they ate, Ada talked about her day, about her math test, about the frog they'd studied in science class. Normal, beautiful, boring childhood things. And Barrett realized this was what victory actually looked like. Not courtrooms or confessions or criminals behind bars. Just him and his daughter, eating ice cream, safe. Chapter 9. The Shepherd's Peace. 6 months later, Barrett opened a small consulting practice focused on ethics compliance for nonprofit organizations. No more crisis management, no more fighting in the gray areas. Just helping good people do good work. The pay was terrible compared to his old firm, but he didn't care. Ada came to visit his new office, a modest space above a coffee shop. It's smaller than your old place, she observed. But it has better coffee, Barrett said, gesturing to the shop below. Will you be happy here? It was such a perceptive question for a 7-year-old. Barrett knelt down to her level. I'm happy wherever you are, kiddo. The office is just where I work. You're what matters. Ada hugged him. I love you, Dad. Love you too. That weekend, Barrett took Ada on the road trip they'd planned 6 months earlier, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Waterfalls, hiking trails. This time, in a rental car, checked thoroughly by a mechanic Barrett trusted. They stopped at the same rest area where the nightmare had begun. Barrett pulled over, and they got out. This is where it happened, isn't it? Ada asked. Barrett was surprised she remembered. Yes. I don't feel scared anymore. Good. That's good. They stood together, looking at the mountains in the distance. The autumn leaves were turning, painting the landscape in reds and golds. Dad, Ada said, thank you for protecting me. That's what dads do. Yeah, but I know it was hard. I know you had to do things you didn't want to do. Barrett looked down at his daughter, struck by her understanding. How do you know that? Because you've been sad sometimes. Even when you smile, I can tell. He sat down on a picnic bench, and Ada sat beside him. You're right, Barrett admitted. I did things I'm not proud of. But I'd do them again if it meant keeping you safe. Would you do different things? If you could do it over? It was a question Barrett had asked himself many times. I don't know. Maybe. But I can't change what happened. I can only try to be better going forward. That's what my teacher says. She calls it growth mindset. Barrett smiled. Your teacher sounds smart. They continued their road trip, stopping at waterfalls and small-town diners. They hiked through forests and sang terrible songs in the car. Ada fell asleep during the drive home, her head against the window, Professor Bandit clutched in her arms. Barrett drove carefully, watching the road, thinking about the past year. He'd lost Norris's partnership. He'd lost his firm. He'd lost his reputation as someone who operated with perfect integrity. But he'd kept Ada safe. And that was the only victory that truly mattered. When he carried Ada into Kara's house, Reed met him at the door. She's exhausted, Barrett said. Perfect trip, then. Reed helped get Ada to her room. When they came back down, Kara was waiting with coffee. How are you really doing? Kara asked. Honestly, better than I expected. The new work is satisfying. Simpler, but satisfying. No regrets? Barrett thought about that. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that Ada had to be scared. But do I regret protecting her? Never. Good, Kara said simply. Because you did the right thing, all of it. Even the parts that weren't technically legal? Especially those parts. Kara met his eyes. You could have let the system handle everything. You could have been patient and hoped justice worked out. But someone tried to murder our daughter, Barrett. I'm glad you didn't play nice. It was absolution he didn't know he needed. Barrett felt some of the weight he'd been carrying begin to lift. A month later, Barrett received a letter from federal prison. It was from Ernest Rivas. Dear Mr. Shepard, I wanted you to know that I understand now what you did and why. I spent months being angry, blaming you for my imprisonment. But therapy and time have given me perspective. What I did was monstrous. I convinced myself I was just making smart business decisions, but I put a child in danger. Your child. And I did it for money. You made me pay for that in ways the law couldn't. You destroyed my reputation, my business, my peace of mind. At first, I hated you for it. Now I think maybe I needed it. The legal system gave me 40 years in prison. You gave me something worse, the certainty that everyone knows exactly what I am. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just saying, I understand. You're a father who protected his daughter. I can't fault you for that. I hope Ada is doing well. I hope you both find peace. Ernest Rivas. Barrett read the letter twice, then filed it away. It didn't change anything, but it was something. On Ada's 8th birthday, Barrett threw her a party at a local park. Kids from her school ran around playing games while parents chatted over cake and coffee. Kara and Reed were there, along with Ada's grandparents. Even Norris showed up, bringing a gift and a tentative smile. Nice party, Norris said. Thanks for coming. How's the nonprofit work? Fulfilling. Quiet. How's your new firm? Good. Different. I miss working with you sometimes. Yeah, Barrett said. I miss it too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Ada laugh with her friends. You did good, Barrett, Norris said finally. With everything, you kept her safe. That's what matters. I keep telling myself that. You should listen. As the sun set, Ada ran over to Barrett, her face flushed with happiness. Best birthday ever, she declared. Better than last year's? Way better. She hugged him tight. Thanks, Dad. Barrett held his daughter, surrounded by friends and family, and felt something he hadn't felt in months, complete peace. He'd fought monsters and become a little monstrous himself, He'd crossed lines and paid prices. He'd lost things he valued and gained perspective he hadn't wanted. But his daughter was safe, happy, loved, and in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not the revenge, not the victories, not the moral compromises. Just a father and daughter, together, safe. The shepherd had protected his flock. The cost had been high, but the alternative had been unthinkable. Barrett had no regrets. 3 years later, Barrett was invited to speak at a conference on ethical crisis management. He almost declined, but Ada convinced him to accept. "You should tell people about what happened," she said. She was 11 now, thoughtful and perceptive. Not just the scary parts, the parts about choosing between what's right and what's legal. So Barrett stood at a podium in front of 200 professionals and told his story. Not all of it, some details remained private, but enough. He talked about the attempted murder, about the investigation, about the choice he'd faced: trust the system or take matters into his own hands. "I chose revenge," he admitted. "I chose to destroy the people who'd threatened my daughter. And I succeeded. But I also lost parts of myself in the process. Parts I'm still trying to recover." He paused, looking at the audience. "If I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, I'd make the same choices, because my daughter is alive and safe. But I'd also warn myself about the cost. Victory isn't always worth the price you pay for it." After the speech, a young woman approached him. She introduced herself as a